Mr. Schwinn passed away, and my wife and I cried, 'cause he never did take that honeymoon.
Councilmember Stickler. Councilmember Wright.
And you can circle back around to Councilmember Clay again.
Here.
Does anybody have any council comments? Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I would like to wish a happy Independence Day to all the librarians living in Tacoma Park, because they're celebrating that event. I know that they're having a special dinner tonight, and this is the 161st Independence Day anniversary party that they're having today. And then I just had a question about tonight's meeting. I know that we have our cover sheet that describes some questions that we wanted to answer, and I wondered how we were going to get into actually, and whether we would get into actually talking about establishing goals for the recreation department, and just how the meeting is going to be structured tonight.
I was going to have the city manager make a few comments, and I think it's mostly the council's discussion. The recreation staff is going to be at the table. They may have a few comments, but they're here as a resource to answer questions, be part of the conversation, but we're going to have the council take it where we want to go.
All right, thank you.
Any other? Councilmember Wright.
My comments are about recreation, but I'm excited to have that conversation this evening. I just wanted to follow up and have some questions for the city manager regarding Baltimore Avenue. I've got a number of requests from constituents about the waiting to repave Baltimore Avenue between Albany and Tacoma, and I know that you were looking into it, Barb, so I just wanted to check and see. Do you have a sense of how much more it would cost us to repave that stretch of road?
Yes, based on what I got from the Public Works Director, it's about $60,000 to $70,000.
And we don't have the sense that there would be a material cost increase by waiting a year to do it, in the sense that the way our contract is structured, it's not as though them coming back and having to be there again drives the cost higher or anything like that.
No, I did talk to the Public Works Director about that very issue, because I know you had expressed interest in that. We basically handle all our street work under what's called an indefinite quantities contract. So it basically, sets a unit price for the amount of pavement that is being laid. There are some provisions in the contract, certainly, that deal with cost escalation in terms of fuel. And obviously that's something that we've all been kind of experiencing individually. In talking to the Public Works Director, at this point she doesn't think there's any necessarily efficiencies that are gained because of the way the contract is structured by having the work done at this time. Who knows where gas prices are going to go and how that's going to affect the contract, but I guess we're all probably hopeful that it's at an all-time high right now, so I don't know that we necessarily think there will be savings if we proceed with doing the work at this time.
And if we were to fund that, it would have to come out of the reserve in the general fund, which is about $300,000 for the year. Is that right?
Right. We have, if the council were to want to do that, I would certainly encourage the council to appropriate funds rather than take this section of Baltimore Avenue, which is not scheduled for paving at this time, and bump another street that's already been kind of in the queue.
Right.
The unappropriated reserve, I think as the council may recall from the budget, is a certain percentage of revenues. It's budgeted at about $390,000. So certainly, $60,000 to $70,000 would be a good chunk of that money. I'll probably get to this under my comments, but one of my suggestions was going to be to take some of the funding for the Piney Branch Pool from the unappropriated reserve because of the difficulty of using program open space funds. And I would remind the council that one of the items that is out there, we are in the process of completing the compensation study that the council had approved, and one of the items that is contemplated to be funded from the unappropriated reserve is whatever salary adjustments for city employees will arise out of that study. And I don't really have a magnitude in terms of cost at this time. I will be meeting with the consultant later in August.
Okay. And your understanding is that that road is scheduled on the list for 2010.
Right.
Is that,
That's correct.
okay. All right, thanks for the research.
Sure.
Councilmember Clay.
Councilmember Wright, you might be interested to know, because I don't think you're on the council when this happened, is that there's actually a road in Ward 2 that got completely left off of the assessment because it was unclear whether or not it was a city road. And in fact, they thought it was a private alleyway when the assessors came out. And they, that was brought to my attention when I got elected by the neighbors, and went out and looked at it. It has, it hardly looks like it's ever been paved, but it's not a dirt road, so at some point it must have had some pavement on it. It's barely passable in my giant SUV. And I wanted to get it integrated back into I wanted to get it assessed and integrated as it would have been ranked, but, you know, all the promises have gone out to people about what gets paved in what order, and so Palmer Lane is not going to be paved until 2011. So just as a point of information, that you might find that interesting.
Thanks for sharing that story.
And if I can also add that my street, Lincoln Avenue, was paved in 3 different segments over about 4 or 5 years, and it didn't cause any particular problems.
And now it needs to be repaved, thanks to
Thanks to WSSC, yes. And I know that WSSC work is one of the things that drives some of the flexibility that's required. Some of the streets that are in line for a certain time get bumped because WSSC has promised to get to them and hasn't gotten to them yet, or hasn't finished with them yet. So there's some flexibility in all of this. Councilmember Robinson.
I wanted to report out on a bit on the day labor situation on Sligo Mill Road and Sheridan Avenue in my ward, Ward 3, near New Hampshire Avenue. And Ms. Ludlow and I met today with 2 staff people and 8 or 10 workers from the day labor site on Sheridan Avenue, and we're clear. It became. I think we had a good resolution. We talked about many of the issues, and that site is closing as of tomorrow. It will no longer be a day labor worker pickup area. However, the completion of the site in Langley Park won't occur until October. So the workers on Sheridan are concerned that that their transition will be rough for them. And what we agreed on today, and what what's the name of that restaurant? Mid-Atlantic Seafood. Thank you. Mid-Atlantic Seafood is where the workers have. That's the adjoining property, the adjoining business. We went and talked to the proprietor there, and he was fine with them staying on his parking lot. And we made it clear that that's private property and that the police will not harass them or ask them to move. We're also continuing to explore ways to use some of the transition funding that we have available, if it's appropriate. And we had a good discussion, and we'll continue it. So I feel that there has been resolution on that site. That the workers and the staff of CASA are on board, and I thank Ms. Ludlow and the staff and workers at the staff of CASA and the workers there for cooperating today.
If I can just add, and please note the large smile on my face as I say it, I'm sure the police would not harass the workers.
Wrong word, yeah, wrong word.
And I believe that's Sheridan Street, not Sheridan Avenue, because both of those are in your ward.
Gosh, I've been corrected twice.
I gave it with a smile.
More than 15 minutes into the evening.
That's fine. Whatever you say.
We haven't even gotten into the major subject of the night.
Oh, you'll get your turn. And if I can just add that one thing that I was going to mention the other night during my comments about the COG board retreat, I forgot to mention, which was that a number of us were quite surprised when the mayor of the city of Alexandria pointed out that their city council takes a break not only in August, but also in July. They take a 2-month summer break. Everybody else is incredulous that they could that, how did things get transacted, and they said they managed, so just food for thought.
They must not be as important as us.
Maybe they're more efficient. I don't have any additional agenda items or any agenda update, so we're to adoption of the minutes. We have minutes for June 2nd and June 9th. Would somebody like to move their adoption?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Barry, seconded by Councilmember Siemens. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any noes? The ayes have it. We are now at public comment. If anybody would like to make any comments about anything on the agenda or not on the agenda, now's the time to do it. We welcome your comments, and please try and keep them to 3 minutes. And I see a familiar face who used to sit up here.
I'm Gregory Hamilton. I'm a Vietnam veteran.
Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Stop. I'm Gregory Hamilton, and I'm a Vietnam veteran and a former 27-year resident of Tacoma Park. I'm also a member of the Montgomery County Chapter 641 of Vietnam Veterans of America and a member of Maryland 1 Chapter Rolling Thunder serving POWs and MIAs. We are also known as the Wall Washing Crew. From April to November, each first Saturday and the second Sunday of each month, we wash and maintain the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and provide other services to veterans in the Washington metropolitan area. I stand before you this evening as an Agent Orange combat veteran with several service-connected disabilities. I have high blood pressure, diabetes, prostate cancer, stage 2 renal failure as a result of me being on the ground and patrolling the rivers in Vietnam. I took an oath and have lived by the faith that never shall one generation of veterans abandon another. Montgomery County is a home of approximately 60,000 veterans, not counting people on active duty today. Recent returnees from Afghanistan and Iraq are facing a number of challenges, including multiple amputees and post-traumatic stress, just to name two. We as a community need to understand that post-traumatic stress is not just a combat or military experience. Approximately 200 seniors living in the Charter House in Silver Spring last year were evacuated for 45 days from their apartment encountered post-traumatic stress, but no one understood the impact on these residents, nor services were offered to help them deal with the traumatic situation. 60% of the people who go to the VA hospital in Washington, D.C. come out of Prince George's in Montgomery County. 60% of our homeless people in this country are veterans. There's another limit for veterans living in Montgomery County, the lack of veteran services, including evening and weekend hours. The majority of states and governments have paid veteran service officers to provide assistance to veterans and families who are seeking services and applying for benefits. Because Montgomery County does not provide such a program, the majority of veterans have to go to Baltimore to process their claims. On November the 8th last year, Ike Leggett, County Executive, announced he wished to establish a Commission on Veterans Affairs. He took the first and right step to assure that the issues of post-traumatic stress can be addressed by a county entity. The Commission of Veterans Affairs will be made up of veteran service officers, health and human services staff, economic development, and experienced individuals can help address the needs of veterans and their families. On behalf of the veterans and their families, I am here this evening to personally thank the Mayor and Council of Tacoma Park for your support encouraging the Montgomery County Council to create a Commission on Veterans Affairs. On Tuesday, July 22nd, the Council passed Bill 2308 to create a local Commission on Veterans Affairs. The bill passed 9-0. As a former Tacoma Park Council member, I am very proud that this council is continued to help improve the quality of life for over 60,000 residents and their families. You as a council are sending a message that veterans are an important part of Tacoma Park, Montgomery County, and the Commission will give them a voice. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, and we were glad to help. And if you ever find that there's anything that you can let us know that we can help with, please let us know. We'll try and do what we can.
Thank you.
And good to see you back. Anybody else wish to make any comments? Okay, then, oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Wallace. Y'all know me. I just wanted to share some information that I've received over the past few months. I just recently finished the Storytelling Festival in Kensington and made lots and lots of contacts in the NASA community, Goddard, just all over the place, who are extremely positive in their outreach efforts. And so if there, and I've also experienced a lot of growth and understanding through Maryland and Montgomery County artist teacher training workshops that are working to teach the sciences or teach social studies or whatever through the arts. If it ends up being an interest in celebrating the International Year of Astronomy perhaps in a different way here in Tacoma Park, perhaps on an ongoing, maybe monthly basis, smaller programs rather than a festival, I would be glad to share some of my resources and things with the rec department if they decide to go that way, or so that maybe you could have, what I found that really made the parents and families happy in Kensington, it was a multi-generational event, and an awful lot of grandparents brought their grandchildren, so they really loved being able to do something to share with their children. But on that note, not too far from here in Baltimore, the Space Telescope Science Institute, which is right outside Johns Hopkins, is hosting a parent and daughter evening under the stars for girls from grades 6 to 12, and their parents are invited to join them for a dinner, astronomy and engineering interactive colloquium, and hands-on activities on September 20th. And it might be something that perhaps the rec department or other departments here or council people would like to promote to parents in Tacoma Park, because you don't always have to, not everything's available here, okay? So like they have the JHU Offutt telescope they'll be able to use, and this is where a lot of the Hubble data is collected. And so I just wanted to share that I did give this information and handouts to one of the rec department employees just before I came in, so you're free to pass that on to people in the community. Thank you.
Thanks very much for sharing that. I hope there's something that we can take advantage of and work with. Thanks. Did I hear something over here? Was there a question or comment? Okay. Anybody else? All right. City manager, have any comments?
Just one item, I guess, just of general business. As I mentioned in my response to Councilmember Wright's questions about Baltimore Avenue, I would like to maybe get some direction before the council goes on recess in terms of the Piney Branch pool and where the city's $50,000 contribution should come from. I think as Suzanne had mentioned in an email she had sent out to the council several weeks ago, we're running into some complexity in terms of the use of program open space funds, in part because the kind of capital improvements, as I recall, that would likely qualify are probably only about $20,000 of the $50,000 pledge that the city has made. So we probably have at least $30,000 worth that isn't even eligible for program open space funds. And I know the concern that Suzanne has expressed to me is that the amount of paperwork and just kind of administrative hurdles to overcome for $20,000 may not be worth it, and we're not even sure if we can actually translate that into getting the contribution done in as timely a fashion as I know the council wants. So we are looking for some direction before you go on recess, because hopefully that process is moving forward, and we certainly don't want to be the stumbling block of not being able to provide the funding that we have committed to provide. So really the only source that I can readily identify would be the unappropriated reserve. I know that's a little bit out of the council's usual practice, where you typically wait until January 1st or thereabouts to kind of get a better sense of revenues coming in. But obviously we can't really wait till January 1st in terms of honoring the commitment we made on the pool.
Anybody have any reaction, thoughts? Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. I favor opening the pool, and if staff thinks this is the best way to do it, I think it's the way to go. So I would vote to support it. I realize that we're running a little bit of a risk here of depleting the unappropriated reserves, but it's a pretty small percentage of what we have. We have over 300,000 now yet, but that's what you said. So 20,000 doesn't seem like.
Is it 20 or 50?
It would actually be the whole 50.
30? Oh, the whole 50?
Right.
Okay.
Just because of the timing involved in
Yes.
trying to be able to get the money to the appropriate parties. The unappropriated reserve, I think I mentioned this, Councilman Snipper, before you entered the room, was about 390,000.
390,000. I didn't remember that. I knew it was over 300,000. So. But even 50 out of basically 400,000 is, an eighth roughly,
Right.
so it's a little,
Correct.
yeah.
Councilmember Lenz.
Here's a novice question. Does the unappropriated reserve ever grow during the course of the budget year?
Actually, it's not a novice question. It is actually determined based on projected revenues, so that figure is set at the time the council adopts the budget, and we don't go in and adjust that figure. It's actually a budgeted amount, so unless there's a budget amendment by this council, it will remain at $390,000.
Okay.
What we will sort of update throughout the year is sort of where we thought we would be in terms of fund balance just overall, and where we actually ended up will be presented probably during the month of November as part of the audit.
Thank you.
Councilmember Seaman.
Thank you, Mayor. And so if revenues exceed projections, that doesn't go into the reserve.
Yeah, it's a good question. Not getting too accounting speak as I'm apt to do, but I mean, ultimately, it doesn't get into the unappropriated reserve, which is the amount that's allocated in the budget, but it will fall back to fund balance. So it kind of all ends up in the same place, ultimately, if you don't expend it.
I would, with what you've told us, support Councilmember Sniffer's support.
Councilmember Clay.
I support spending $50,000 out of the unappropriated reserve.
I do too.
Councilmember Wright.
Because of the kids I supported, I find it frustrating because, again, I feel like the county, I know we reached an agreement and a deal with the county, but, we thought we were going to be able to use program open space money, and again, feel like the county should be taking on the full responsibility, but given the situation and wanting the pool to open, I would be supportive of spending the $50,000 as well.
So we'll schedule a budget amendment.
Right. I think what the mayor's alluding to is from a technical standpoint, this will need to be formalized. We normally try to get the budget amendment to you before we do something, but just due to the timing, as long as it's just clearly verbal approval by the council tonight, so when you return from recess in September, we'll actually have a budget amendment to present to you so we can formalize it and handle it from an accounting standpoint.
Point of clarification, since we won't be using the open space funds, then that will still be available for other uses.
That's correct.
Right. Okay.
We don't lose the allotment.
Right.
And just, I'm curious, is the county on track to open the pool when school opens? Do we have a sense of that?
I don't think that the pool will be open right away when the school opens. They're working very hard. I know Robin Riley from Montgomery County Recreation Department has talked about a month and a half's worth of actual work that needs to be done. The biggest issue has to do with, is there an operator for the facility? And we are still waiting to hear if Adventist Community Services will be taking that on. And if not, there would be some delay in that. But the actual work that's required for opening, the estimate's about a month and a half of work.
And considering we probably won't delve into this level of detail during recreation presentation, would be interested to know at some point what the Recreation Department's plan is to, in the city's general plan, to publicize and get the word out about the pool so it's properly used.
Let's see, this was discussion of your comments. Do you have more comments?
So you want to go ahead and, the preview for the rec discussion, you want to go ahead and do that now, or wait?
I was seeing if you had any more city manager comments. Okay.
No, I'm sorry, done with that part.
So now we will move to the work session discussion of recreation programming and associated council policies. And yes, now everybody can come up to the table. And if you want to make a few comments.
Sure. I had just asked the mayor if I could just make some preliminary comments. Obviously, there was a lot of information included in the agenda packet. And I guess I just wanted to provide some background of what we included and what the thinking was behind that. I think first and foremost, we wanted to make sure that we were providing as a staff, the council, with very comprehensive and kind of a factual foundation for the discussion you're going to have tonight. There's obviously different levels of knowledge about what we're doing in recreation, so we were trying to get everyone sort of on a level playing field. I think there were certain items, such as the FY08 program participation numbers, that certain council members had asked for. And then I think as we were trying to put together the packet, we kind of went through past discussions, items or comments that may have come up during the budget about which the council expressed interest. And that would include, from my perspective, things about how the department uses volunteers, what is our scholarship policy, who's eligible, how do we treat pricing for non-residents. So that's why some of that information was included. In terms of how we tried to format the data, I think one of the things that I certainly took away as a city manager from the 2009 budget process was the council really wanting to have as much detailed information as you could, not only about recreation, but just generally about how city dollars are being spent and essentially what the residents are getting in return, if you will, for the expenditure of those funds. My intent, unless the council feels otherwise, is that we really weren't going to go through much of the information that was in the packet. It was merely, once again, kind of provided to try to be responsive to issues that have been raised in the past. Certainly, the rec staff is well represented this evening, so if you have questions about any of those handouts, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer them, but it was really not our intent to walk through every piece of paper in your packet, and I'm sure most of you are probably relieved to hear that. You know, obviously this is the council's discussion, so it's kind of up to you how we go about talking about items. I think out of the whole packet, if there was a section that I would hope that we could at least spend some time on this evening, would be the section that's entitled Recreation Department Program Summaries. There's a kind of a little one-page blurb, if you will, about all the different programmatic areas in the Recreation Department. And part of the reason why we put that together was as we went through the FY 2009 budget process, it didn't appear, at least to me, that kind of talking about activities by a budget division breakdown was particularly helpful to the council. It really didn't seem to give you all a sense of what we were doing in each of the programmatic areas. So as Deborah and I were talking, we were trying to figure out how to give the council in a very kind of abbreviated fashion kind of a thumbnail sketch of each of the program areas that the staff being represented here tonight is responsible for by breaking out kind of what we did in FY08 in terms of program offerings, what we spent on those programs, what kind of revenues were generated, if any, in some cases, by those programs, and tried to give you a sense of cost recovery, because that has been a topic that has come up probably over the last year or two in particular. I think in terms of trying to give the council a much more specific idea of cost recovery by program, once again, I think we were trying to show you where city tax dollars were going, if programs were being subsidized, which ones those were, and to what extent. Because ultimately some of those decisions really do reflect what the council's policy is. I was the one who did the agenda cover sheet. In part, obviously, I was trying to at least provide some framework for the discussion from a selfish standpoint, that I got something out of it that I was looking for. And I think as I tried to figure out what those questions should be, and once again, the council is free to go in whatever direction you want, but I was trying to truthfully get a very clear sense coming out of this meeting of what the council wants to see us doing in terms of our recreational programming, and certainly the policy areas that you are ultimately responsible for as the elected body of this community. When I think back over the last year or two, there's been lots of general comments about recreation. I can tell you as your city manager, if we just talk about, you know, recreation very generally. So if some of you have said, well, I'm frustrated about what we're doing in recreation. As your city manager, that's not actionable. I can't take that comment and do anything with it to try to address your concern or your frustration. I respect the opinion that I have received from many of you, either privately or in group meetings, but as your manager, once again, I can't take individual comments from individual council members and translate those into a policy direction that I take away as your manager that I'm charged with implementing, or that I assign to Deborah as the department head who works for me. So I do need to get a sense of what the majority of the council wants. And in city management circles, that's counting to 4. I know that many of the council members you know, have used the term with me that you want to stay out of the weeds. I think most of you probably know as your manager, I really don't like you being in the weeds, so I think we're in agreement with that. And I'm not really looking tonight for you to comment on individual programs. I mean, certainly if you have an opinion about yoga or ladies boot camp or whatever, you know, that's certainly fine. But I'm not expecting you to necessarily give direction about that level of programming. What I was hoping to get at with the questions, and if they were not appropriately phrased, I apologize for that, was to just get some general feedback about how you feel about what we're doing in each of those programmatic areas. And to put it very simply, I guess that I'm getting a sense of what the council views as success, as I break down the department into its different areas. From a practical standpoint, we are in the process of setting pricing for some of our programs in the fall. I know Deborah and I have had a number of conversations, and I know the rec department is getting calls about what we're going to be charging in the fall for our aftercare programs. In all candor, we have held off in making some of those decisions because we wanted to get a sense of, those are programs, as you may have noted, that are subsidized. If the council is uncomfortable with either subsidizing those programs or the degree to which we're now subsidizing them, I need to know that, and Deborah needs to know that, so she and her staff can basically set their registration fees at a level that this council is comfortable with. We're not asking you to say charge $200 a week, but I think the broader discussion in terms of to what degree are you comfortable subsidizing any particular group of programs, I think is your prerogative as a council, and we're just trying to get a sense of your direction. As I mentioned, I really want to be very clear about what you're wanting from the staff. So I am trying to have you be as specific as you can be. I think in the interest of that, had the opportunity yesterday, the mayor and the deputy mayor were here for a different meeting. And I did take the opportunity to ask for their help this evening if they could try to, I guess, help me identify where there are areas where there appears to be a clear consensus on the part of the council, because I don't want to try to read between the lines and take away something that either I was mistaken about or that you didn't intend. And I think we all saw that not having that opportunity to really ensure we're all on the same page became a problem when staff was trying to draft the Montgomery College resolution, and there was some frustration about that. So I have asked the mayor and the deputy mayor to kind of help me, I guess, identify where there appears to be council direction, to clearly state that before we would move on to another area, because I just want to be clear on what you are asking staff to do. Obviously, the rec staff is out here in full force. I think that's a very clear indication of their interest in hearing from this council directly about what you're looking for. As the mayor, I think, mentioned in his comments, we're really viewing our presence here tonight as a resource. We would, as we go through some of the areas, like to make some very brief comments, and there's certain members of the staff who did not have the opportunity to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their background when the budget work session took place in early May. But this is your meeting. Like I say, we're here to kind of help facilitate your discussion by providing technical information or background, but we really are here first and foremost to hear what you have to say.
And I'd like to give council members an opportunity to kind of make some general comments about what you're hoping to get out of this evening and where you'd like things to go. But maybe first, just to make sure that we all know who's seated at the table with us, if you all can just say who you are and what it is that you do and anything else that you think is appropriate. We'll do that first, then we'll get to our comments.
Carla Kelly, I'm manager of team programs. I am a graduate of Western Illinois University with a bachelor's and a master's degree in recreation and park administration, and I am certified by National Park and Recreation Association as a certified park and rec professional.
Hello, I'm Greg Clark, the Assistant Recreation Director here for the city. I have a bachelor's degree in public administration from Virginia State University, which I'm very proud of that, and a master's of administration from Central Michigan University. It's also in public administration. I began in this field in 1995. I am in my 14th year in recreation. Gave my background last time: park ranger, facility director, community programs manager for Central Prince George's County, youth coordinator for Prince George's County, and now assistant director of recreation here in the city of Tacoma Park.
It occurred to me, I don't think I said what I do last time as the recreation director, but I've been the director here for 8 years. Prior to this, I was in Massachusetts as a director of a small department for 13 years. I too have a bachelor's and a master's degree in parks and recreation. My bachelor's from the University of Florida and my master's from Indiana University. You mean, I'm not speaking loud enough. People don't normally say that about me. Okay. So I just want to say that I'm very proud of the group here. This is clearly the most talented and experienced group of people I have worked with in my career. I'm very happy. And this isn't everybody. Melanie is in the audience. She's actually on duty tonight, and we decided she wasn't allowed to have fun while she was working. So.
How you doing? My name is Neil Abels. I'm a home economic major. Major in fashion merchandising, clothing, and textile. I taught for 12 years in D.C. charter schools and in PG County. I've taught 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, 8th grade earth science, business and marketing, and career search. My first time working in the recreation department, really enjoying it, and looking forward to doing this.
What do you New Hampshire Avenue Rev?
Oh, I'm on the New Hampshire Avenue Recreation Center, yes.
Hi, I'm Paula Lasowski. I'm the Seniors Program Coordinator. I have a degree in Recreation and Leisure Services with a concentration in program planning and therapeutic recreation. I've lived in Montgomery County all my life. Previously, I worked for the Damascus Senior Recreation Center in Damascus, Maryland, and I'm really happy to be here at Tacoma Park and to grow the seniors program here.
My name is Carrie Anashesky. I'm the Recreation Manager for school-age programs here in Tacoma Park. I graduated from Frostburg State University with a bachelor's in Recreation and Park Management. I've been working in the field for 9 years. I got my start up in Baltimore County, and I've been with Tacoma Park for the past 5 years.
Well, thank you all
We're
very
done.
much.
That's it.
Yep,
We're all
yep,
set.
okay.
Good night.
We're going to be referring to, in a minute, this part of your packet with the pretty pictures on the front. I just had a few introductory comments I'd like to make, and then as Barb said, we really want to turn it over and hear from you. And we do welcome this opportunity to speak with you directly and closely, more closely than I pictured. But it's very nice to be here. As many of you know from the many times I've been up here, we've been striving for several years now to improve the operations of our department with the feedback from the community and from the council members. And we continue to strive to provide a broad range of programs to everyone in the community. We realize we don't reach everyone in the community, and we probably never will, but we'll still make that our goal. I think that we want to have representative participants of our community, and this group right here does serve a very diverse group of people in age, ethnicity, cultural backgrounds, and so we're well along our way to achieving our mission, but we're not satisfied with that. We've heard from the council that there's an interest in having more partnerships. Everybody at this table and other people in the department have been charged with developing more partnerships in the community. We're taking it seriously, and actually we've already made some progress since last year with our partners. The philosophy we've been operating for cost recovery has been passed down through the ages, and as Bruce is the only one who's been here through the ages, he can attest to the fact that basically our understanding is that we subsidize youth and senior programs, and we do not subsidize adult programs, which is not to say we don't provide financial assistance to adults. We do that, but in terms of a general overall philosophy, we don't subsidize adults. What you're going to see when we go through this booklet is we have a pretty hefty subsidy, which would be 100% for our senior and our teen program. We have a healthy subsidy for our community events, and our more discretionary type programs like summer camp and after-school programs. It's not as big a subsidy, but we're going to go through that. Again, as Barb said, I'm really not going to read on here. I'm just going to walk through each area because I know it's a little bit overwhelming. We were overwhelmed just putting all the
information together. And these loosely associate with our budget divisions. So you see admin on the first page. Is everybody with me on admin?
Bruce, did you want the council to have an opportunity to talk before we jump into this?
I was thinking that.
Okay.
You know, I didn't know how long going through this would take.
I'll defer to you. I wasn't really going to speak that
Yeah,
much.
I'm happy to
Okay.
go there.
Very quickly.
Sure.
Okay. The first page, which for the benefit of the thousands of people watching on TV, is that are awake, yes,
Oh,
hopefully.
we aren't at midnight. We haven't picked up where we left off.
Basically, this covers administrative salaries. Mine, most of mine, some of Gregory's, our office assistant, Licia Monfort, and some aspect of Carrie's salary. And the management objectives that you see on each page are pretty much verbatim from our budget management objectives. I'm not going to go through that too much. These have already been discussed with the council. As you can see, we don't really collect money based on our salaries. It's not legal, and no, we're just sort of the overarching support for the department. On the next page, you can see the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center. The expenses and the revenues are listed there. The cost recovery is 89%. This does include the county's contribution to running the center. As you know, we're under contract with the county. So the city supports 11% of that budget. And what I did want to say, this is the first year we've actually applied any full-time salaries. I believe it was Councilmember Clay's suggestion to kind of even out what the real costs are. So we took a guess at how much % of a person's salary was devoted by the amount of time they spent. You know, this was a guess, and we might refine those numbers, but it does give us a better picture.
Can you just remind us what the kind of subsidy is?
This year it is $125,000.
I just wanted to make one thing clear to the council, is that the utility costs for all the city buildings are not captured in individual departments, so anything associated with the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center that involves utilities or like janitorial custodial services would not show up in the numbers that you have before you.
Thank you.
You said 125,000. What was that figure?
That was the amount that the county, as part of the contract for the city to run the facility.
So is that included in the revenues portion?
Yes.
Here? Okay.
The next page is community programs. It's kind of a catch-all. It's got sports, special events, you know, adult sports as well. And this is pretty heavily subsidized, 80% by tax dollars. We don't charge for we don't charge for the Halloween events, for any of our special events. You'll see the adult softball league in there. That individually, that program would break even and pay for itself, but the overall cost recovery is listed. The next page is facilities. This one's a little complicated because it says it's 100% subsidy from the city, and this covers our maintenance of the athletic fields and the renting of the community schools. So we pay to rent space at the schools. Of course, that number's come way down since we've opened the community center, because we don't, you know, we used to have to rent every room that we needed. And so now that we have the space here, that number's come way down. We do not collect any revenue for this program. I have a note there that we rent Hefner Park and the park pavilions, and that is revenue, but it isn't exactly associated. It's a little bit complicated, probably too much detail to get into, unless you're interested. But that basically comes out of the Public Works budget, any sort of maintenance on those issues.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Aren't the rentals for all these facilities associated with the activities on all the other pages?
No, this is people renting the facility. So if you were renting the Hefner Park, it would be revenue.
So you're saying it's
There are no
not, you're talking here about not our programs, but where somebody, say, rents it for a birthday party?
Right, right. And it says no revenues, but that's what the note on the bottom says, there is an actual revenue, but it doesn't go back into it doesn't represent the cost of running the athletic fields. I mean, renting Hefner Park is a facility.
I understand Hefner, but my question is that isn't the, like, field maintenance for Lee Jordan, the gymnasiums, doesn't all that, the purpose of renting the gymnasium and maintaining Lee Jordan and Ed Wilhelm Field is to support the programs that are on the other pages, though, right?
The gyms would be, but not the athletic fields, no. And actually, as you said, the parks, those are the pavilions, so that's not the athletic fields. We don't have any expense toward maintaining the pavilions because that's in Public Works. I warned you it was a little confusing, but...
But something like the kinder music revenues would show under the program.
Yes.
But the field maintenance is in here, or the field maintenance is in
Yes.
Public Works?
The field maintenance is part of the $77,000.
So just to follow up on
Oh, I'm
Colleen's
sorry, I
question.
changed the page on you. I was way ahead of you.
If we're
Sorry.
talking about,
63,184, right.
if we're talking about the adult softball league, they play that on the field, right?
Yeah. It
Right.
would be a cost that would be assignable to all of these different categories.
Right, so anything that uses the fields, any programs that use the field would, these costs theoretically could be assigned to those programs.
I think, but venture into territory I probably shouldn't here. I think that's a fair question. We have some programs that do use the fields. The staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the vast majority of the field use, however, is probably the sports leagues, which are obviously maintained by the city in support of those, community organizations. So I understand the point some of the council members are raising. I think it would be hard to sort of differentiate what we're paying to maintain those fields and trying to, allocate what is really in support of the soccer and the baseball leagues that probably are the predominant users, but certainly we use them on occasion.
And the
That
schools,
calculation
too.
became sort of difficult to figure out how we would slice and dice that, quite honestly.
I just want to add, the schools are major users of the fields.
But we pay to...
Yes, that's part of the, right, and they don't pay us. But this is part of the arrangement that was made, 10 years ago, Bruce, so that we would have permitting rights, so that we have priority of those are essentially our fields to use and permit. That was the trade-off.
But in that MOU, we don't get compensated in any way.
No.
Okay. I like the way it works in reverse with ICB.
Okay, on to the summer camp, the next page, we're almost done. Prior to attributing part full-time salaries to this, we almost broke even. I think here we're showing a 37% subsidy. That's probably, for the most part, full-time salary, like Carrie's salary and Gregory's salary. But this is a pretty good cost recovery, I think, for a summer camp. On the next page is our before and after school program. Again, prior to this exercise, which, is I think it's useful for us to see how much staff time is attributed to these. Basically, the city subsidizes 45% of the after-school program, before and after-school program. I'm moving on to the community center, and this, again, gets a little complicated. The way the revenue codes are set up, any classes that you might take in here, a dance class, a yoga class, goes into this revenue account for the community center. I've broken it out into seniors. The community center is one budget division in the budget, so you'll see one big number. But within that is the teen and the senior programs. I've broken them out so that we could evaluate them separately. And what I'm showing you here is the expense of $208,000, and that is for operating this building for, from 10, but again, as Barb said, this is not maintenance costs. This is staffing, supplies, weekend staffing, overtime staffing. And actually, half of this, I think, is paying the staff for the Monday night council meetings overtime. That was a joke. Okay, moving on. We do list our partners here, too, as well, in case you're interested. These are people that use a facility with us, joint programming, or some of these groups are sort of grandfathered in by the council as people who use the facility. Okay, the next page is senior programs. As I've indicated early on, this is 100% subsidy from the city. You will see this small amount of $200. For some reason, we decided to charge the seniors $10 for the computer class. And we have a lot of returning members. I can't say that we probably collect that consistently. We'll just say the revenue is for the computer classes for the seniors. And finally, we've got teen programs, again, completely subsidized by the city, and the expenses for that are $88,370. In these expenses are included fringe benefits, which is important to note, is about 30% of our salaries. So I just kind of wanted to give you the overview of where the city was having to make up the difference. You have all the stats you need, I think. We're certainly willing to produce something else for you, but we're really here to answer your questions and see what you want to talk about.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like to give my colleagues a chance to talk about what you want to talk about. And I thought maybe the kind of the structure for this was to try and keep it as loose and informal as possible so that it's not going to be like a council meeting where I'm recognizing people in order. I'm going to try and provide maybe some structure and some, I'll be the disciplinarian when I have to, and try and get us back if we're straying too far afield or somebody's really getting antsy to, I'll try and be aware of that and steer it a bit that way, but want to keep it fairly loose, but also wanted to make sure that, as the city manager mentioned earlier, that where there are some things where we kind of come to a conclusion, where we seem to have a consensus as we go through this, that we kind of stop and recognize that and make sure that we get buy-in, everybody's on board, and we say yes and move on to something else, rather than get to the end and go, boy, we covered a lot of ground, and then somebody's got to go back through and look at the tape and say, what ground did we cover and what did they really decide? So to the extent that we can do that, I want to try and do that. And maybe if I can just start off by seeing if maybe my colleagues on either side of me want to go first, and then I'll let it go from there.
I think Mr. Berry is...
He's so relaxed that he is having trouble pulling his thoughts together. Let me first say thank you all for coming. What an impressive group you are. I haven't heard all of the credential making in a while, but it seems to me that we have a great team assembled here. And I wasn't here in the old days when it was often said that the rec department staff was, let's put it as diplomatically as possible, may not be as experienced and credentialed and motivated as the group before us tonight. But I'd like to remind the community that this is a new day, and it's a new team, and one that seems highly competent and credentialed, and it's an exciting group to have here with us tonight and to be representative of the department. The things that I'm really interested in seeing, the first would be to expand the number of people that are participating in the program. I know that it has dropped a bit in the past year, which suggests there is room for growth, at least up to what it's been before, if not beyond. And I think that one of the solutions to this is the league and leagues in general. And I think the winter basketball program, winter basketball league could easily increase the numbers to where they were before, if not exceed them. So one big category, of course, is the leagues. Then for growth. Then there is the other category of before and after school programs, which perhaps are less likely to be sources of large increases in the future. Then there is the other program category, which consists of all of the various classes and programs that you do that are susceptible to fluctuations because of a variety of different factors, and for which there is a lot of opportunity for experimentation, trying new things to bring in new groups that we haven't served before. The leagues also are maybe the best place to imagine people coming together from different ethnic groups, different socioeconomic groups in a way that the soccer league, I think, has proved possible. It's not always easy to wave a magic wand and say you're going to have 20% of this ethnic group and 20% of that economic group. I don't think it works that way because people sometimes like to gravitate towards things in order to be with people who are like them or unlike them, and it doesn't lead itself very easily to programmatic integration or policy pronouncements that will create integration. But to the extent to which we can experiment with things like leagues that do tend to bring people together from different walks of life, I think the solution is there. So there are a number of categories that you can think about as far as how to expand the numbers. The other thing that I'm very interested in is to leverage the partnerships that you have at present. By that I mean, how can we get these groups not to add work to what already is not a very large staff, but to do the work themselves, with you providing the facilitation and the support, and of course the facilities themselves. I don't think that we have adequately yet plumbed the depths of community groups, including some of the committees that we have chartered here under the city ordinances. They're all capable of doing public programming, but the fact is very few of them are. And those that are doing these public programs, very few of them are doing them in connection with the facility or with the staff. So I think that there's a great opportunity to leverage some new partnerships as well as the existing one. And then finally, or two more things. One, of course, is as we open the pool, the opportunity for bringing in new participants in the program, cross-marketing and upselling to all of the groups so that everyone is a captured population that is also a potential client for an additional program. If they're in one now, they could perhaps be in 10. That certainly will grow the numbers, not the aggregate ones, but the numbers that are in the programs themselves. And then, of course, this room, too, as it is refurbished, there will be yet another room within this larger facility that is susceptible to programming, will need to be programmed, and could also act as a magnet to bring in people who have not been down here before, but which we would like them to be. And then finally, and selfishly, the New Hampshire Avenue Recreation Center. And I know you're doing a terrific job. I've heard great things about the programming you're doing, and I want to really thank you for that. It's a fresh ideas and energy over there. It's probably not the easiest place in the world to run and to staff, but maybe it's one of the more important facilities that we have. And therefore, I'd certainly like to see it enhanced with additional programs to bring people from the neighborhoods in. Those extremely important high-rise developments there, which are sources of a lot of the people that we're dealing with now, and should continue to do so. I understand there's a swimming pool in the back of this facility that's all green and mossy now, but could yet be another facility in the future with which we might have some agreements with the property owners and such, and there's opportunity there. And the facility itself is falling into some disrepair, and those people that go there, that's not an easy problem to resolve. It's going to cost a lot of money to do it, but perhaps in partnership with the county, we might be able to see some enhancements over there as well. So these are, I know, quite general. I don't want to tell you what programs to offer because I don't know. I don't have degrees like you do in these things, and I'm not going to pretend to know. But I do think that there is opportunity for us to increase the utilization of the facility to serve more people, and I want you to know that I'm available to help in any way, modest way, that I can, and I'm really happy that you're all here and that you're working for us and for the community.
And one thing that I didn't do was point out that the chair of the Recreation Committee is here. Kay Daniels-Cohen is sitting in the audience.
Smiling. Exercising in her seat.
And if you really feel like you've got to just jump in with something,
She's not finished.
She's awful bashful, I don't know.
Yeah, I know. So if you really feel you got to jump in with something, circle around and sit in the chair. I don't want to encourage you too much, but I do want to give you a little opening. Terry.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Quite frankly, we're here tonight talking about the Recreation Department for a whole session because we've been asking to talk about the Recreation Department for some time, and I think each of us have increased the amount we want to talk about over the year that it's taken to get the council sessions scheduled. And again, quite frankly, some of those reasons for wanting to talk with you is because we hear varying comments from the community. I hear varying comments from the community, some very positive about recreation programs, but some frustrations with the recreation programs that we offer. I could sit here and go through one by one what those frustrations are, but I don't really think that's the positive use of our time for tonight. I'd like to give you an example of frustration that I've heard from people, and I've had myself with the bus that we bought for the city, for the Recreation Department to use. The time that we bought the bus, the council talked about wanting to use that bus and have bus stops around the city to pick young people up to bring them here to the recreation, to the community center, to other recreation programs, to increase the use of this center and also to increase the participation in rec programs. Now, whether or not my memory serves me right, and that's what was done, that's a frustration that's built in me, okay? But it doesn't do much good to set that out as a complaint. What I think really is productive is for us as a council to tell you what we expect from the Recreation Department, what we want to see from the Recreation Department. And, I was kind of struck by your expertise and both your background and your experience as you went through the introductions. And, I'm not, I don't have the same backgrounds in education that you do in recreation. And so it would be foolish on my part to tell you how to accomplish those goals that we would set out for you. So what I would like to see tonight is that we work together to define what our expectations are for the Recreation Department, and then you take those as goals and come back to the council and with a plan. This is how we're going to accomplish those goals. What do you think? And we can again sit across the table and reach agreement on how you're going to do it, and then you go do it. And probably also talk when you bring back with your plan on how you're going to do it. We could talk about how we're going to know if you were successful, or if we as a city are successful in meeting those goals. And so there will probably be some kind of measurements in there, but I don't envision, a big indicators project that's going on, another other part of the city. So what I'd like to see out of tonight is that the council say, you know, what are our goals? Maybe, you know, I know when I walk into the community center here and I don't see anybody but staff, I get frustrated that, you know, we built this community center because there was a need for programs for kids, and I come at 5:30 and see that it's closed on a Saturday night, or I come in here on a Saturday during the day and don't see anybody but staff in the building. I don't feel like my expectations are being met. But in fairness to you, I don't know that the council has ever laid those expectations out. I know, you know, I have never sent you an email and said, this is what I want you to do, not that you would particularly use your time to meet my expectations. It should be meeting the council expectations. So, again, I go back that what I think we ought to be doing is sitting here tonight and laying out specific goals. I handed Deborah and my colleagues here on the council tonight a list that I propose as goals. They don't have to be those goals, but I think the council should agree to what we expect from the recreation department. And then I think there's steps to go on beyond that on how we implement that will make things a whole lot simpler for all of us. It'll be more fair to you and more fair to us and the city residents. So that's it in a nutshell.
And, you know, we could start taking up some of these points, but I want to make sure that all my colleagues get a chance to kind of say what you want to say and what your expectations are.
Hi. I've been on the council for 3 years, and actually do have some experience in recreation. I have a master's degree from UC Berkeley in community development planning, and I ran the City of Oakland's Marine Sports Program. And we had 200 kids a day in usually about 10 camps in 2 different sites with people who couldn't swim out on the water. So it was an interesting time in my life, and probably my favorite thing that I have done in my life. So I do have, you know, some understanding of what you're talking about and what it looks like to put together a program. So I've been a council person for 3 years, and when I first came on the council, well, first, I have 2 kinds of constituents. I have constituents who've lived here for a long time. Their homes are paid off. They get a homestead tax credit, and they don't gripe at me about their taxes. And those people call me and they say, I want you to provide all the recreation programs for free. They're great delinquency prevention. I personally, I think that delinquency prevention is you know, one of many outcomes of the recreation department, but it's not what I think its objective is. So I have interesting conversations with those people, but I love them. They're wonderful people, and they write checks to the Tacoma Foundation, and I think they would write checks to you if you had actually a mechanism to provide scholarships to folks, and I can tell you who they are. The other people that are in my ward have moved in the last 5 years, and they maxed out everything they could to buy their home. They pay a lot in taxes, and they're squeezed. They're my age, so they're squeezed between their kids and their parents. My mother just wrecked her car today. And they call and they're unhappy. And typically they don't use the recreation department that much, and they're unhappy that their perception is we've paid for this big building and nobody uses it. So those are the things that people say to me. I will also say that in the last, I'd say, 6 to 9 months, people have stopped griping to me about the recreation department, which I think is a good thing. Although they still ask me occasionally when they're going to be able to pay for something with a credit card online or on the computer. But in general, people have stopped complaining to me about the recreation department. And when I was first a council member, that was all I heard. Now, part of that might be because the new community center came up, and to no fault of yours, for those of you who are new, there are many issues about the community center. So that's kind of been my experience. I think that I agree with all these other things and the broad goals, and I don't want to tell you, like, I think 20% of the people that come should be African American and the other 5% should be from Lithuania or whatever. I think you actually have to come back and tell us what's happening with that and work on that. But the problem, so I have to go back to my constituents, and they want to have more quality programming, and they want to have more diversity in the classes that their kids go to. And in what is unusual for my ward, people actually tell me that they would pay more for better programming. And I hear that a lot. Not from everybody, but I hear it a lot. And so I'm interested in how the cost recovery looks. And I think that I would like to feel like there's a real understanding of what our true cost is and what our opportunity cost is for the different things that we do. So I will pick out a couple of different things. So one thing that I've talked about previously is the Extreme Horizons camp. And so I think it's great to engage kids, and I think it's great to engage this group that is, in transition from being kids to being young adults. And I think that we can engage them in a way that provides recreation opportunities for them without some of the expenses that are built into the program. And so one of the things that I said last time was that several of the kids take the class throughout the summer. It's not, one kid comes in and then you have a whole new set of people that repeat the next year. And I had, in my sailing classes, I had this too. Kids' family would put them in sailing camp all the way through, and they would get bored after about 3 weeks, and I'd make them like a junior counselor or something. But you have this program that's set up that takes kids out to the theme park sometimes a couple times a week. And I understand you backed off on twice a week, which I think is good. But it concerns me when we put people in a van for a really long time and drive them out someplace from anywhere to an hour and a half to 3 hours one way, and then they're there at the park for 4 hours and they're coming back. I think there's an opportunity cost that's involved in that. That's not about money in this particular instance, but it's about what could you really do with the kid for 12 hours in this area. I mean, within a half hour of here, there are a lot of things to do with the kid. I notice we don't have any sailing programs. But that's one of the things that I'm concerned about is, what are the opportunity costs for these things? And the Boyd's Bear Trip is another thing that people have picked out. And, what's the opportunity cost of the Boyd's Bear Trip to drive all the way to Pennsylvania to do a Build-A-Bear activity?
I can speak on that, actually. That trip benefited the Recreation Department in many ways. One was the fact that it opened up the Recreation Department in a new light. We welcomed new people who had never registered for programs before. We actually had 4 participants from that program who had never signed up for camp before sign up for camp. On top of that, have invited their friends to come because they had such a great time on our trip, as well as having the experience in the camp. So it's a outreach program to, give people an opportunity to leave out of the city, get out for a while. Some of the people don't have transportation, so it's a way to kind of get out, and they don't have to worry about how am I going to get there, what am I going to do, and all those other options. So it was a unique opportunity to have the most diverse group get together on a bus, go an hour and 20 minutes, talk about Recreation Department programs, talk about what they're looking for, other options. So it was a great way to kind of reach out to the community and find out from them what they were interested in, and also being able to introduce them to programs that they probably would not have registered to before.
I'm impressed that you can get to Gettysburg in an hour and 20 minutes.
It's south of, it's not really in Gettysburg proper, but.
So I think the point being that still that there's an opportunity that you made that choice as opposed to another choice, and I think a lot of people thought that was.
We have other closer
unusual.
trips. That was just a specialty one that we picked.
So.
Could I interrupt? I'm not familiar with the phrase opportunity cost. What are you referring to?
When you,
If you do one thing,
make
you don't
a
do something
choice
else.
to do something, then you don't do something else. So if you decide, and actually there's an opportunity cost argument to be made for this trip also. If you decide to use your administrative staff in a program role, then you're losing the opportunity to use them at some other point during the week in an administrative capacity. So you're using your highly educated, high-paid folks who can do a lot of the important program management and development that you have to do what a program specialist could do. But yeah, it's essentially you do one thing, and when you do that, you give up the opportunity to do something else.
Economists love this idea.
A what?
Economists love this idea.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I mean, I feel like we're in the weeds again, but it would seem to me that the time, I mean, I know that my staff, everybody here, likes to do direct programming. It's sort of a motivational tool that we use, for the staff to get out of the office, meet the residents, do the thing that they're interested in. Gregory will go out and throw a football with the kids. I go out and take photos. These are things that make your job, more interesting, keeps employees longer. The fact that this was something Carrie was interested in, she flexed her time. So, in fact, you're correct. There was a day she was not in the office. We managed without her on that day, and it seems to me I wouldn't want to discourage that kind of initiative or creativity. It's something we'd never done. It was, in my opinion, hugely successful. And the fact that we have new customers, I mean, if you think about a marketing tool, think of it as marketing. If we spent whatever we spent on the bus to produce a glossy flyer, how many new customers would we get? I don't know. So I think those kind of judgments that we make, again, if we can get to the outcome, if the outcome new customers, more trips, more family programs. We had heard that, families want to recreate also. And so we were trying to address, Carrie's done a snow tubing trip. We have a bus. I have said this to you before. It's not my idea of a good time to sit in a bus with kids for 2 hours to go to but if you talk to Carla, she'll tell you a different story. She loves it. Right, Carla?
So my point is that there is an opportunity cost, and I would like to see it represented in the way the department is managed. I'm glad you're shaking your head, so at least somebody understands what I'm talking about. So if it's represented it should be represented. So when we ask you to tell us what does something cost, and you come back and you say, well, we used FTEs for this, and so it didn't cost us anything. There is a cost there, and it is represented by a dollar figure of their salary and their benefits, and you can tell us what that is. And I would feel much more comfortable if you came to me and you said, if we asked about something and you said, okay, I did this, here's the true dollar cost, and it cost us $700, and I thought it was totally and absolutely worth it, and here's the reasons that it's worth it. I may still disagree with you because I think that there are other ways to do marketing, but I wouldn't feel like we weren't having at least what I would consider a more accurate exchange, and that's what I'm saying to you. And so when I hear you say, it's like nails on the chalkboard when I hear you say that the FTEs don't have a cost, because they do.
If I can, because I think some of the rec staff is probably looking fairly puzzled, and as the person who either had the pleasure or the pain of answering certain questions about Boyd's Bear trip or going to a bad flashback moment from last year, Old Ragtop Mountain, the rec staff was not the one who sent the council the email. I was an economics major. As Councilmember Snipper was saying, I certainly understand opportunity cost. In putting that information in those emails in terms of whether staff flex their time or, in essence, on Old Ragtop Mountain, it happened to be an exempt employee who, quite frankly, doesn't get paid whether they work 70 hours or 80 hours. There's no overtime involved. It was not at all to suggest that there is not an opportunity cost. the council, I mean, hopefully we won't go through, after tonight's discussion, too many rounds of, you know, a lot of time on those items. Certainly, it was up to me as your city manager, if you wanted me to calculate, you know, the salary and benefit cost of Carrie's time, that's on me, it's not on those folks who are sitting here tonight. So those who were looking sort of confused about what was going on, it was in emails that I had sent out to the council in response to some inquiries last year and this year.
I'm going to stop talking.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Councilman Clay. I apologize if I did.
So that's
Before you cut yourself off, maybe this is a time for one of these kumbaya moments, attempted moments, where we stop for a second and say, I think what you're saying, I think what I hear you saying is that the policy direction to the staff could be that before you actually program something going forward, think about how much it costs to do it. And if it costs $1,200 to do a trip and you're making $100 in revenue, that's different than a lot of the other programs you do in certain other areas where you may spend $200 and get $100 back. And then I think what you also should, if I'm hearing you correctly, say that you balance things. You think about the cost before you make the program decision and put it in the calendar, but you also think about what other kinds of intangibles, another economic concept, there might be, which also are valuable in and of themselves. And as you weigh these things in a careful and deliberate process, then you come up with a decision that may be different than you started out with. Is that a fair summary of?
Yes. You can see why Doug is the communications guy in council.
And the
official thing.
I would just say, though, that that's not a policy. I think the policy it should be at the higher level, which is what do we want to accomplish, and not telling you how to do it by tracking the expenses or calculating the expenses before you do the program. I think we should be telling you, at a higher level of what it is we want you to accomplish. And then if it's, well...
Pretty high level, if you're asking, if you're leaving the decisions on whether to go to Teddy Bear's Rag Mountain or someplace else, we're saying to you, that's your decision, but please consider the following. That's a fairly high-level policy. That's not in the weeds.
And these folks are the leadership. They should understand what the cost trade-offs are. You're Carla Kelly, right?
Is that helpful? Is that a helpful?
I think it's helpful. I mean, I guess the impression I don't want to leave, though, is, I mean, I guess since I have the opportunity, if the council doesn't, to talk to some of the staff, is I think, in my own experience, and I, certainly not a rec person, but I've hung around them, I guess, working in local government, is I think there always are going to be those kind of decisions where you try programs. I think certainly the staff does certainly take into account what things are going to cost. I can tell you, Deborah, I've said this to her, Deborah's about probably the cheapest, almost to a fault, department head I have on my management team. So I guess I don't want to leave the impression that they don't think about that. And I think to some degree when you don't have participation numbers hitting a certain threshold where it may become cost prohibitive to put on either trips or programs, that's part of the reason why I think you see in every rec department ideas that get thrown out there, and if the participation levels aren't what we might have thought they would have been, those programs often get canceled unless they're sort of in a pilot stage. But I do understand what the council's saying, and I respect that. I think I'm seeing a lot of nodding from the staff, so I think they're understanding the issue as well.
I think it would be a little easier for us if we knew the ultimate cost goal, and then we backed from there. And we might say, okay, we'll do boys because it's worth it for the dollars and cents, and we would make other decisions if we were responsible for the ultimate. Is it a percentage? Is that,
When I ask for the revenues and expenses for a program, and I can't get the answer back in hard numbers of this is what the revenues were, this is what the expenses are, then I'm left to believe that you all aren't tracking that, and I'm left to believe that telling you what the cost recovery policy is or the fee structure policy is doesn't make any difference because you're not tracking what the revenues and expenses are.
Mayor, can I...
And my sense is that you now have additional tools where you'll be able
Right.
to do that much more easily than you have been in the past.
Not yet.
We will.
But
Okay.
you're getting there. We've talked about it.
I do want to add that not everyone on the council feels that cost recovery in this kind of analysis is appropriate. We certainly don't ask the police department to tell us, okay, you're doing a new tactical whatever thing,
library
unit or so on. We don't ask them, are the collaborations with the various counties, what do you spend? We don't ask for that kind of information from the police department, and I don't feel it's appropriate to ask that kind of information for the recreation department. So I don't want to give the impression that everyone on the council supports that view. I do, however, support the view that the implicit thing that Doug was saying, which is that anytime you talk about a program, you need some kind of outcome that you're looking for. And those outcomes might be intangible. You might do a program just because it's a lot of fun. You might do a program because it's a great outreach thing. You might do a program because a lot of people in the community ask for it. You might do a program because you're going to make money on it. All of those things, are decisions you guys would make. I think it's just the idea of making those things explicit so that you can then say, we did program X and the thing we were looking for is that people had a good time, or the thing we looked for is a new way of outreach, or the thing we were looking to accomplish was, to satisfy a particular community request, and then you evaluate, even informally, did it accomplish that goal? If your goal was we want to break even on this particular program, then of course that would be an outcome. But to me, all these other intangibles and other kinds of things are also perfectly legitimate goals, and you would want to use them as a standard to evaluate your programs. And that's the only kind of, I agree with Doug, that's the kind of guidance I would be interested in. And I really encourage you to try new stuff without fear that it's going to be a total flop. If you guys come up with a great activity and it turns out that 3 people show up, you've learned something. If on the other hand, 50 people show up, way more than you expected, you learn something also. So I'm happy to hear about things you try as well, whether they succeed or not. I just am interested in that you have done the upfront work of, here's what I'm trying to accomplish, here's the outcomes I'm looking for, and then at the end, did I accomplish those? That's what I would like.
I would like to make a statement. In the audience, I believe still, Stacy Baker is present. We have met with Stacy, Gregory and I did. Area of expertise is pretty broad, actually, but she talks about outcomes, and we sat and had a really good session, and she's offered and volunteered her time to work with us to get some metrics or some concepts that might be helpful as we go forward. And I just wanted to recognize her and let you know how much we have appreciated her, and she's actually going to help us set up the new software templates so that we get at these kind of things that you're talking about.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yes.
I want to say, Ruben, the police department does make those choices. When they came to us and they were evaluating what kind of cameras they were going to put in their car, they had to pick which vendor, and it was based on how much it cost, and the different vendors had different the cameras had different characteristics, and with one they got some better functionality, but it didn't interface with the rest of the other police departments in the same way. And they are making those decisions. It takes a different. It's different with the recreation department, but I would hope that every department in the city, when they're looking at new programming or new things that they have to do, look at what the capacity of the budget is and what the trade-offs are for that.
If I can just say at this point, it's a fine line between making sure that each of us kind of gets to say what we want to say here on our own initiative. We've got a good back and forth. I don't want to ignore the people who haven't had their chance yet. I see Josh waving his hand, and I'm cognizant of down here. I'm not sure Ruben got to say what you wanted. Are you trying to get your chance, or do you want to continue the back and forth on this one a little bit longer before we...
I was just going to comment briefly on the back and forth. Not not had my chance yet, which is just to say, I don't think I want to know in detail necessarily about every program and the cost individually, but I want to have a great deal of confidence that sound management tools are being used to assess those trade-offs and decisions. And that I know you don't have all the tools yet to do that, but we've given you the money to invest in them, and you're going to do it this year. And I think some of the questioning comes about particular programs because people want to understand, well, are those tools being used? And they're not being used yet, not a fault of your guys, but just not having the tools. So I think it's, to respond to Ruben, is I think we would want everyone in the city, and I would hope in the police department, when the chief is making a decision about doing a particular detail, he's thinking about, okay, that's going to cost X, and I think it's going to help reduce crime in this way. That doesn't mean he has to come back and justify each program or each move with us, but that sound management tool is being used. That's just
and I want to go back to Ruben and see if you want to talk about what you want to talk about, or did you get to do that?
I didn't. I just got a little hot under the collar because we were, and I apologize for that, because I thought we were focusing on the monetary aspects to the exclusion of other benefits that programs in the city, whether in any department. My general comment is, to me, the police department and the rec department have two of the hardest functions in a city like Tacoma Park. There's a lot of stuff outside your control. You put out a program announcement, and you don't know really who's going to show up or not. And it's very difficult to rearrange stuff once you get that immediate feedback. Nobody showed up for this. The police department has an impact on crime, but it's pretty small. The economy goes up and down, and that has a bigger impact on crime than other stuff. So the other departments have a bit, to me, in my mind, have a little bit easier. The rec department is essentially all personnel, virtually all personnel, and you're not only dependent on the staff, but you're also dependent on the people in the community. If the people in the community are picky, and I'll just be honest about that because some of my constituents are, then, God himself couldn't design a program that would work for some of those folks. So I think I really do think it's a tough thing, and I have only a small number. I think the programs are quite good in general, and agree with Terry that the way the council should work, particularly in this session, is to identify a small number of priorities and let you guys figure out how to address those priorities. You guys are on the ground. You know the territory much better than we do. And my role is to try to support you in accomplishing what those goals are. So if the council says we would like you to do more of X, you come back and say, well, we could do more of X, but we need more money to do it, then I want you to feel comfortable saying that because it's the council that then has to, sort of put up or shut up, about it. I'll stop there. That's a good general comment.
And I'll let Josh and Dan fight it out who wants to.
Go ahead. I have a number of areas of interest, and I'll kind of walk through them and see, just to put them out there and see how that maybe they'll help seed the conversation as the evening progresses. I worked in the tech field for a good long time, and we had a client which was the Department of Education in Maryland. And that started in about 1990, think it was 1994, so it was a good while back. And they put a whole lot of information on the web. We put a whole lot of information on the web with the Department of Education in graphs and charts and so forth. A lot of it came back in achievement, mix of teachers and schools, financials, all this stuff. Huge interest in that information in the public because parents want to know where their kids are going to school and is it a good school. And the information was used in a lot of ways. That kind of analytical information was used in a lot of ways. What the administration in Baltimore wanted most to use that information for was to serve the underperforming schools, the schools with the poor kids in them. And they felt, and I think it played itself out, this was before No Child Left Behind, and then No Child Left Behind kind of got incorporated into it. When legislators were told, well, these schools are performing poorly, and they don't get much money, and it's mostly poor kids there, it was very hard for the legislators to go, oh, that's not, forget that. Because it was in black and white, it was right there. So that kind of, that was an instance where numbers were very meaningful. The outcomes of numbers were used for a specific purpose. The outcome of metrics and measures and all that stuff were used for specific purposes which had significant social impact. And I'm glad Stacy's going to help out with you guys. I guess what I'd hope to see when as you evaluate numbers is that you bring us not a zillion numbers that we have a hard time going through, but numbers that are meaningful for what you want to do and for what we think we want to do, even though we may have a lot of different ideas. So I just want to sort of put that out there as just the seed of one way that you can use numbers. I have a friend who is in a more or less similar sized city as ours, and they have a pretty active rec department, and they have a rec commission. I was telling my colleagues this the other night, commission instead of a committee. And every month the head of rec and the commission meet, and they kind of, I won't say fight through, but they work through a lot of the things that are at issue, what the citizens want in that town, and what staff wants or can do or feel is appropriate and so forth. And council doesn't hear about those struggles or discussions much, unless there's something that's really comes to an impasse. The example he gave was, well, the rec department wants to put in AstroTurf. I'm not saying you guys would want to put an AstroTurf in the field, but the rec department feels that AstroTurf is the answer, and the rec commission feels that the AstroTurf is not the answer. And they just can't come to a resolution on that fact. So then it comes to the council, and the council has to hear it, and they have to make a decision, and that's what's going to happen. There's been a lot of talk about how we need to involve the public more, or our constituents more, and I don't know how our rec committee can help you out in the best possible way, and help us out in the best possible way by helping balance the issues in advance of the time they get to us. But if the rec committee and you were able to work some things out, there would be far less kind of misunderstanding on our part about what's going on, because we could always point back to the rec committee and say, well, they should have figured it out, And so there's another kind of area that is on my mind that I don't know if that'll help you, but it kind of is in the outreach area to the public. I'm hopeful that when we get this room finished, it'll kind of lighten things up a little bit too, and involve the public in a different way, in a creative way, with performances and workshops. So I just want to put that out there. I haven't seen. We did take a field trip to Greenbelt. It was a very interesting field trip. And my impression when we came back was that they have a very large rec department, which does a whole lot of things. But I never got a sense of per capita, what's their expenditure there, or what from their rec department and our rec department, whether we feel we're in a we're leveraging our resources better or not as well. And so that's another kind of high-level chunk of information that might help me on the council determine whether we're funding you appropriately and whether the level of service that you're offering is in a good context, or if it makes sense. And that kind of brings me over to the county, because they're another entity that's offering rec services. And of course, because I was blessed with being a co-chair of the TASD, the Tax and Service Duplication Issues Committee, back a few years ago, that's an issue for me. And Barb, Council Manager Matthews City Manager Matthews has, I know, done yeoman's work on the committee up there, the task force up in Rockville. But that's an issue that, what would you do to get some of that money that we pay to the county and doesn't ever come back? Or and how are you taking advantage of the county programs and the county resources and all that? So that's kind of another area that is, I know, on our minds. How are you leveraging county resources, or what are they doing or not doing that is a burr under your saddle? That if they would only, So that's another area. I won't go on too much longer here. I have a specific thing, and then I'm done. And that is, I'll get right down, I'm going to go deep in the weeds now, just for a moment. Spring Park's in my ward. I've heard two comments from constituents recently about Spring Park. One was at a neighborhood meeting the other day, why don't we have programs in Spring Park like we used to? They were very effective in bringing neighbors who won't go to the community center. They won't go. There are kids and families near Spring Park who will not come here, but they felt very well served there when there were programs there. So I didn't really know how to answer it. When the question was, why aren't there programs in Spring Park? I don't know. So I need you to tell me over time, not right now, but over time. And the other comment I got about Spring Park is, why is the field getting chewed up every Sunday with 40 soccer players there, and it's getting worse and worse and worse? So when that was coming up about, well, how do fields get maintained, and who makes decisions about when fields are being maintained, and what budget does that come out of, I didn't know how to answer that question, and that was very recent, Barb, and I haven't addressed that. But that's a constituent question that I have to respond to now. What are we doing about the chewed-up field in Spring Park, and can those people use it, or is that against the rules? And so I need to. That's a level of weedy detail that I need from you as a council member for my constituents in the ward. And so with all that blather, I've tried to categorize it into various things so that you'll understand what's on my mind and what I have to work with. I will turn it over to Josh.
I guess it starts with what we're all committed to. I think you're all committed to, you devoted your life to recreation and working with kids and seniors around recreational activities and adults. And I think probably if you talk with each one of us individually, we've probably had an experience with recreation in our lives. I know I have as a kid. It definitely impacted me growing up in Boston, and kept me from being delinquent or getting into trouble sometimes. I won't say the times when I did get into trouble. And gave me opportunities to experience new things and expand my horizons and think about what my life passions were and make choices ultimately. So I think that's the thing we have to remember. I know at times I'll put the elephant on the table. I think you guys have felt attacked at times, and we felt frustrated at times. But I think that all comes from a place of everyone actually really wanting extremely high quality, good programming for the citizens of our city and the people from outside who come in and use those programs also. So I just put that out there. I'll share my experience with recreation for about 3 years at the end of college, and then after college I helped to run a youth development program in Connecticut in 5 different cities that served about 2,500 kids. And that was a very formative experience for me, and one of the, like Colleen's experience, one of my most enjoyable jobs I ever had. And I share that not as a credential, but more as a point to say that I want the same things that you guys want. I devoted 3 years of my life. You've devoted your entire life to it. I also think that we should try and talk at the high level and give you guys some goals. And then in a good management practice, you should go away, think about that, and come back to us with how you're going to achieve those goals and how we're going to measure what success looks like. And I think that's a critical point, a critical item, because it'll relieve our frustration and relieve your frustration, because then we'll have some objective way to say, hey, did we do what we say? Did we do what we say we're going to do? Did we do what we set out to accomplish? So the high-level goals that I have, I also have, like Doug had, growth. I want to see programs grow and more people engage in them, and individuals who are engaged in them engage to a greater degree in a richer experience. The second is that I would like to see the programs be intentional and strategic in how they serve the customers. And you guys may already do that. But when I see the program, the list of programming, I see them bunched in certain areas, but they seem to me to be sort of haphazard. Like, we're going to try this, we'll see whether people like it. And I agree with Ruben, we should try new things. I don't want you to feel hamstring or say, well, I don't want to try that, I'm not sure how it's going to come out. But I do think we should be trying things from an intentional perspective and thinking about, okay, for 13-year-olds, we're going to have this program to bring them into recreation, this program to keep them here, this program to help them think about a summer job, or whatever the different pieces are. We should do that kind of in a holistic and strategic way. So that's my second kind of goal. The third is I'm glad you guys are already talking about it more in terms of involving outsiders or other groups. I would like to see the use of volunteers increase. I think it'll give us richer programming and is an important policy piece. I know that's a challenge, working with volunteers, having done that at different points when we were running that program in New Haven. Sometimes it creates more work than the leverage you think it would give you in running the program. So we have to do it wisely, and I realize at times working with the personalities and strong opinions within our community can be a challenge, but that's part of what we're signed up to do. The next goal has to do with sort of costs, and we've talked a lot about it already, but I do think we should set a clear cost recovery target, and we should really understand sort of the cost management piece, the total cost of providing a program. And I know some things are kind of fixed costs, which can end up being, you have to think about them in an opportunity cost way. But that's okay. You can, within that cost management, you can have fixed and variable costs as a component of each program. And I'm just trying to read my own note here. I can't remember what it was, so maybe I'll come back to it. There were 5 things, but those are 4 so far.
And I'll just take a couple minutes to say a couple things, and then we'll take a short break, and you all can get up and stretch. And I know fed a little liquids there. Make sure that you're all comfortable. We'll come back and we'll agree on how much longer we're going to go before we finish. A couple of the things that I've thought about as I thought about Recreation Department and goals and where we've been. I just want to back up for a second. I did want to say, as I've heard some of my colleagues talk about some of their experiences, I thought, I've had a couple too with recreation stuff. I was a camp counselor for a couple of years, but that was 40 years ago. And I've currently been involved with helping to create and run the Silver Spring Tacoma Thunderbolts Summer League baseball team, and one of the things that we try and do is improve facilities for kids in this area, and we were the ones responsible for basically building the baseball diamond at Blair High School. And we're still trying to be in a position to do more, to make more contributions toward improving facilities in Silver Spring and Tacoma Park. One of the things that I thought about was, I'll take just a minute and talk about the bus. I remember that when you all came forward and said, here's the bus that we want to get, the council said, and I was one of those people saying it, we want a little bit bigger one, which made it need the commercial driver's license. And I know that that has probably caused some frustration for you all, because it has that added need of having that CDL for that driver rather than more flexibility for somebody else driving it. So I know that we kind of imposed some of that difficulty on you, and I just want to make sure that everybody, including all of my colleagues, remembers that we did that. We thought it was a good reason to do it. Maybe we didn't understand some of those downsides operationally for you. Given that we have the bus, I'm hopeful that we can continue to improve how we use it and how often we use it, both for the kind of some of the distance trips, and also the ability to go around and kind of pick up and drop off, particularly kids. I always think of Ruben's ward, and probably Doug's too, in terms of getting kids to the facilities. I think that that's going to require some more thought, some more work on your part and on our part to make that happen. One of the things that I've felt we need to do more of is partnerships, and kind of a full range of partnerships, where some of the different relationships with different partners, and I would include the county as in thinking about partnerships. One of my colleagues, I think it was Dan, was talking about the programs that the county provides, and I know that there are any number of people who would say, well, if the county provides the programs, kind of why do we have a recreation department? And so thinking about how we can maybe even direct some people towards some of those programs sometimes, or I don't know whether it's possible to do joint programming. But I think there's some interesting possibilities for partnerships with existing entities, with new partners, and I know I hear a lot from people about existing sports leagues and kind of the relationship with the recreation department, and how that's, maybe it used to be one way and now it's a different way, and I'm not necessarily going to pass judgment on which way is better or the reasons why it's changed, but I think making sure that we partner with those organizations and that it runs as smoothly as possible, and that's a good way to extend the reach of the recreation department, and not having to have all of you high-paid professionals do all the work, but the parent volunteers do a lot of it. So kind of bringing in those volunteer partnerships to enhance what we do. I've also heard a lot of people say that they recognize that over the years that what the recreation department offers is much better than it used to be. I think it was Colleen was saying that some of the complaints you used to hear I don't hear anymore. So I recognize that the level of work that you all have been doing has really improved what the department has been doing, and I get that feedback from the community. I think, like Terry, I have the sense that a lot of people feel like, build it and they'll come, and we built it and where are they? I think many times we see a lot of people in here, and other times we come in and don't see people, and having a good understanding of why that may be. You know, if we don't have people on the weekends, well, maybe it's because they've got a whole lot of other opportunities, and for most of the year, they're going to be outside doing things, and this building is mostly about inside activities. So it may be that that's one reason that we don't see them on the weekend. They're off doing things with their families, their friends. They've got more flexibility on the weekend, and maybe that's just a recognition that that's the way it is. Two things that I noticed in going through the information that we got from you all. One was the information we got in the update, which had some of the reminder of some of the survey results. And the one that was particularly interesting to me was that participation in a Tacoma Park recreation program, renters 24%, owners 32%. And when you look at respondents' household income, as income goes up, participation goes up. And I guess I would think that that means we need to redouble our efforts for what I've always assumed was a target population of people with less opportunities, equating with lower incomes, and that wondering how consciously we address that, what the difficulties are, how we can have more participation from lower income folks and renters. Because I always kind of assumed that the proximity of this building to a lot of the high-rises on Maple Avenue meant that the participation there would be fairly high, but the survey results tell me that may not be the case. And the final thing that I noticed on the handout information was in the community center section. That's the one that you went through, Deborah, where we had the classes and programs and the FY08 numbers and the FY07 numbers, that the revenues and expenses and everything went down from 07 to 08, and wondering if you could just make any comments on that.
I can. I'm afraid I'm going to get confusing again. We have, for our classes, we have basically contractors that we hire that are teachers. And they enter a contract with us. We offer the program. We have various arrangements. It might be a percentage with the contractor. It might be a number of people. It might be an hourly rate. And depending on that arrangement, it goes up and down. This year we had two contractors sort of opt out of using our registration system. It's actually the Kindermusik program. And because of our famous registration system that we will soon be calling our former registration system.
It's the one made by Pentimation, in case anyone.
Thank you very much, Terry. The instructor felt like she could do a better job because she had internet registration, all these things. So that entire program was lifted out. So the expense and the revenue was lifted out, and that was a huge program. And that also happened at the Recreation Center with our Jazzercise program. And in some cases, it represents fewer participants, and certain programs, there's various reasons why that is.
So in those cases, you just kind of said, okay, the whole program, the teaching of it, the management of it, all of the money, the statistics, everything, it's just that whole center moves out.
Right, and then we get our percentage of revenue. And that's why I put the 2 years, because I wanted you to understand that even though it looked like, $29,000, $27,000 less in revenue, the net was not so large. The participation was still good in the Kindermusik program. It's probably our most popular program. But the impact on the bottom line was less stark.
It's helpful to know that, because when you just look at the numbers, you go,
right,
revenues are down, what happened? Suzanne?
Yeah, I wanted to address the issue about kind of the lower income population in Tacoma Park. One of the things that I have to keep reminding myself when I look through statistics for Tacoma Park is that a lot of the lower income households are single-person adults who live in Tacoma Park. And we really haven't geared a whole lot of our programs, and certainly not subsidized programs, to those people. I don't know how that, I'd have to look at the details on that statistic from the resident survey, but we find that in a number of cases. Did I put this in the wrong place? But that's one of the things that pops up. We think of families, but that's not necessarily who that demographic is in the statistics. So I just want you to know that there's, especially on Maple Avenue and some of these areas where you've got all these apartments, lots of single adults are there and may not have time to come here because they're working, or it may not have the programs that they're interested in. So I do, I'm not saying that that's the explanation, but we find that in a lot of our statistical study.
Okay. Yeah. Sure, go ahead.
It's something worth sharing. And that is sort of the policy perspective on that we don't view ourselves as an organization that's offering recreation programming and making people aware of it, but that we're part of our role is making people aware of all the recreational opportunities, whether we're providing it or someone else is providing it in the area. And I think that's sort of an important, if the rest of the council ends up agreeing on that, that's sort of an important policy distinction. And I think we do some of it around the sports leagues, but I would cite the previous situation with the pool as an example of maybe where we didn't do a great job. And I know it's there's so much going on in the greater Washington area. It would be a huge task to filter all of those things and suggest, what people should do. But I think we can do a better job of sort of picking and choosing and highlighting some of the other opportunities, whether it's county programs or things, really interesting things that might be happening down on the mall, whatever it is. It just making people aware of that and having that be part of our role, I think can enrich people's experience.
I was just trying to get a sense of if we take a break and come back, kind of getting a little buy-in from people about how long we come back for. And I'm tempted to just say, do people feel like if we aim for maybe a 10-minute break and come back and go till 10:30, is that a reasonable length of time? Is that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. All right. I think we better say 10:30. It'd be nice if we finish at 10:15, but by that clock we'll come back at 9:47. try and get us there. I know that the recreation staff would love a little bit of feedback on the service areas, on how you're doing there and whether there are any kind of, I don't know, adjustments that need to be made, some general guidelines there. We need to give a little feedback on the current cost recovery setup and talk a little bit about whether there are any changes that need to be made and maybe particular attention to the resident, non-resident split. Got my glasses on to read my scribbles. I'll just mention that on the subject of the bus, a couple of us have some ideas, and we'd be happy to share those. We don't need to do that tonight.
Mayor, is one of the ideas sell the bus and get a smaller one?
No.
So that,
No.
And is that a cost issue? I mean, if you have a bus and you don't use it, and you wish you had a smaller bus that you could use, common sense would dictate that you sold the big bus and buy a small bus. Sounds like I'm stirring up something I shouldn't be stirring up, so I'll just...
We've talked
No,
about it
but
internally.
that idea has
We've talked
been
about it
raised.
internally.
And I would like to dispel the myth that we don't use the bus. We do use the bus. We don't use it maximally. And I don't know that we would ever use a vehicle all the time, but that idea was floated recently, and I think it's worth talking about.
Okay.
And I would just like to also make the observation that when we bought the bus, there was a discussion of how much it would cost for someone on staff to get a CDL, and the council took that into consideration when we approved buying the bus, the larger bus.
I would just mention, though, I think getting to Colleen's idea of opportunity cost, if you have someone whose primary job is to do recreational programming and then they're driving a bus, there is an opportunity cost to that as well. So
Let's just say that we had some other ideas
Yeah.
for
Different night.
going in those
Different night.
directions that might...
So the bus is kind of parked in the weeds.
Yes, and anybody who wants to venture into the weeds with the ticks, they go there with the bus. A general sense of kind of the goals that were common threads that we heard, and then the final point being if we held up the hiring of the, I don't remember what the title of it was, but the position, senior, and getting to some clearance or not from us to go ahead with that. So, did I miss anything that is of great importance before we do those?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would just mention that in talking to the staff at the break, and this, you may have encompassed this in how you described it, but in terms of the resident, non-resident split, there's obviously the cost differential issue, but in talking to some of the staff and some of the council members in the past, it would be helpful just briefly, I guess, to get some sense of the council of who you think our service territory is, and I guess as Carla put it to me, I think very simply, is it kids or just Tacoma Park kids? And I think that is an important issue of how you see the department's mission, because a lot of these kids go to school together. There are seniors who, know people who live just across the line, and I think if this council, wants us to focus on, and I think we do have a primary focus on Tacoma Park kids, I don't think there's any doubt about that, but to some degree, how you do that split somewhat drives the decision of which kids are going to participate in our programs. And there is a point at which, if the pricing becomes so prohibitive, particularly I think with teens and seniors, then we will see participation drop. So that was one issue that I talked to some of the staff members about during the break.
On that specific issue, I think it's clear from my perspective that, we're talking about kids in the community, and the community crosses the borders of Tacoma Park and includes Silver Spring. And school. And school kids, exactly.
We go to a school, same school. I think Colleen had a good way to put it.
The answer to this question from my constituents depends on how long they've lived here. If they've lived here for 5 years, the answer is they better be a Tacoma Park resident. If they've lived here for 20, it's everybody, come free. But what I think is good is for kids who live in Tacoma Park and kids who go to school here, no matter where they live. There has to be some kind of a boundary on it, because if we're going to design our programs so that we have a lot of heavy subsidies, I do get a lot of pushback from residents about randomly subsidizing people, but they totally understand the concept that some of their kids go to school in other areas in the county or other places, and they go to the rec centers in that area. And in exchange for having this school system with these specialized programs, that means other kids from other areas come here. And we don't want them to get out of school at 3:30 and not be able to afford to participate in a program and then be hanging around until their parents get off work and pick them up till 5 or 6 o'clock.
And I think it goes hand in hand with this, that we partner with the county rec department, as we used to years ago, where they actually not only referred people to their programs, but they helped in programming and helped with some of the resources that were expended here within the city.
Yeah, I mean, I will just briefly, because it's a much bigger discussion and not really on point tonight, is part of my argument on the revenue sharing task force to the county, which truthfully readily acknowledges that they essentially are not trying to compete with the Tacoma Park Rec Department. But that's part of my argument, is that we are serving, school kids that are not Tacoma Park residents, but county residents, which is part of the whole argument for a rebate.
But I'm not talking about a competition. I'm saying that they used to staff the programs side by side with the city staff, and used to work on developing the programs and putting money into the programs. So it's that kind of partnership that I think we should see from the county.
And just on the cost recovery part, what I hearken back to is what I always hear from the county council mainly, is that they feel that for the monetary contribution that the county made to the facility that we're in, that means that county residents should get access to programs. And what they would say is on an equal basis with Tacoma Park residents. I don't think that's the case. I think there's some differential, some slight bump up for county residents, but I think as we're looking for who the participants are, that it's not just city residents, it's city residents and county residents, and that's a necessity probably mostly going to be East Silver Spring, and it's going to be the school kids, and maybe and I think we currently have some small differential, and I think that's the proper way to do it, because if we just start limiting in any way to just city residents, we'll have that argument from the county.
The differential is in your packet somewhere, but we do have not a lot, but some DC residents, and also a large number of PG County, certainly up at the Recreation Center. So I know Montgomery County has a county, that's the distinction. We sort of are in a tri-jurisdictional area, and I just want to make sure that's, we're not just talking about Montgomery County.
And my kind of off the top of the head solution to that is that, and it may be different in different, the difference may be different in different programs, but that in general, it's whatever the structure is for city residents, Montgomery County residents are a little bit more, and Prince George's and District of Columbia residents would be somewhat more than that.
I would agree with that, because I think the cost principle there that's involved is that the county residents, their argument is that they contributed, but they contributed to the capital cost, and not to the ongoing programming. And we've already priced our program so low that we're not even hitting in essence, we're not even hitting really our staffing costs. But I think, a three-tiered system is.
And I'm not pretending to know what the difference between the tiers is, but I think that general principle is a good way to go.
Well,
Can I make forward? I think we kind of get a head nod. I guess I'd look to Neil. I mean, and Doug Barry obviously had, I think, had a babysitting issue, but my recollection, and Neil, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that particularly at the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center, we are drawing a lot of Prince George's County kids, and even though it may not be school boundaries, to some degree it's the proximity of where they live and their friends, and I guess what's sticking in my mind is a young man who was either beaten up or stabbed north of the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center. This is probably a year or so ago. It may have even predated Neil. But where he chose to come to seek help after that incident was the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center, because that's where he was affiliated with the staff and where he felt comfortable. So I guess in that particular location, I guess I do want to point out to the council, it is bordering Prince George's County. These kids do have relationships, and it is a corridor, quite frankly, that we all painfully are aware has a lot of issues. So I mean, I'm perfectly respectful if the council wants to have a three-tier system, but I guess, Neil, can you speak at all just briefly to where you see kids coming from?
Prince George's County, D.C. of course, and also Montgomery, Silver Spring County. A lot of guys bring their friends. We have students, we have kids that live in D.C. that goes to Blair, so they'll come to the gym because their friends go to Blair. We have also kids that live in the New Hampshire Towers that go to Wilson, Coolidge, and Cadoza, those schools, so it kind of goes back and forth. So we have majority of the trifecta area.
Also, to add to this discussion, I am currently in negotiations with Prince George's County as well as Montgomery County on joint programming for the Recreation Center, particularly a basketball league. So that would also have an effect on the fees.
I'm not so excited about a three-tier system. I think, because I think the participants that you're talking about are probably those who are least able to pay additional fees. I think the two-tier system is appropriate, that city residents get a break because they're really paying for the facilities. But I think that's sufficient, that the non-city residents have a higher fee, but I don't think we need to complicate things that we're having trouble with now by going with three-tier.
I have a question. Have we considered entering into an agreement with Prince George's County for, do we have Tacoma Park people who go to Prince George's County for their recreation programs?
I'm sure we may. Well, I know Stacy Baker has informed me that she is an educated consumer who gets rec guides from all three jurisdictions. Is that right?
I know we have neighbors that use the pool. There's a pool over there. I forget what it's called. What is it? No. Yeah. Maybe it's the Chillum. They buy some membership in it, but it's a county-run pool. So I don't know if it'd be worth an agreement with them, if we're not going to charge people from out of the county a differential fee, that they would do the same for us.
I have a suggestion. What if we ask staff to come back with a proposal following this general guideline that we were just talking about of a lower rate for Tacoma Park and a somewhat higher rate for others? And with I liked your suggestion of doing the kids who go to school in Tacoma Park.
That sounds to me kind of like where we are now.
Well, I can say for teen programs, I charge a resident fee and a non-resident fee, and the non-resident fee is the total cost. So if we take a trip somewhere and the ticket to get in is $45, the Tacoma Park teen is subsidized. Typically, they usually pay something less than 50%, and then the non-resident fee is $35, which is a prohibitive cost for some teens. But the teens that are non-residents are many teens that support our program on a regular basis. And I think Neil has the same thing. We do have a core group of kids that are non-residents that support our program, always support our program.
I think before we start subsidizing the non-residents, and I certainly am sympathetic to their need, but I think we should have some kind of a discussion with Prince George's County and see if there isn't some assistance that they would want to give to their own residents.
And mine are Montgomery County residents.
Or Montgomery County.
Right.
either way.
I think certainly that's something we can pursue, and, there's a variety of different ways that could work. So, I guess what I'm taking away, though, from the discussion, because I know I'm very cognizant of the time, is, to me at least, a very clear message from this council that you do see a role for the city in serving not only Tacoma Park youth, but youth who have some relationship to the city, whether through schools or some other connection.
Absolutely, and I'm less clear in my own mind about this last discussion about, subsidizing the non-residents and
I think what I heard Carla say, please correct me if I'm wrong, that if it's a trip and there's a ticket cost, non-residents are paying full freight.
Right, but that's precluding many of them from going on the trips. And,
right, so you may have concerns about that.
I'm not sure that addresses some of the community needs that we have in these areas, and so, like I said, I'm less clear on that.
Is it kids, or is it just
Right.
Tacoma Park kids?
And I think it's really kids, but I think we need to work through on, are there other alternatives other than...
Right.
And what I hear is the general sense that two-tier is the way to go.
Matt, before we move on, and I'm going to look to Paula, can you just speak briefly to non-resident seniors that participate in our programs? I'm not as familiar with the numbers, so.
Right. The majority of the seniors that participate in our program is Tacoma Park seniors, residents. But I am attracting and beginning to attract a wider circle where we're going into Northwest Washington, we're going into Hyattsville, other areas of Montgomery County. So I'm always confused as to whether, first of all, we don't charge anything for the senior programs, but I'm just wondering if I should stop at Tacoma Park boundaries, or I should be trying to reach out to seniors beyond Tacoma Park.
Can I comment on that? I think that, I know a lot about senior programs because my mom calls me and tells me about the different bridge clubs that she goes to and all the different places. So I've got an interesting look on what's happening in Southern California in the senior programs. I think the senior program should be free or have a nominal cost of 50 cents or $1 or something, just for buy-in. And it is the nature of the senior programs that's what they do. They find the thing that they like, and they move from place to place, and they arrange rides for each other. And so, I think it's a service to our seniors to bring the other folks in, and so that they learn about the different things that are happening, and it broadens the network that they have. So I would support essentially a zero-cost recovery, and the only point of having anybody pay something is just kind of a token fee for buy-in.
May I ask Paula just one other question just to help kind of move this discussion along? I mean, I know a lot of our seniors, not entirely, but there's certainly very large senior populations at Victory Tower and the Franklin, both of which are Section 8 housing. So there are some income limitations just by the very nature of where they live. Do you have any sense with those that are not Tacoma Park residents, I guess, cutting to the chase about their ability to pay, and is, if any nominal amount? Your Colleen's obviously fine with being totally free regardless of residency. So, if the rest of the council's, I'm seeing Ruben nod, so I see two.
I'm fine with serving all of them, not stopping at the border. As a general rule for any program, I feel like some little bit of token something is worthwhile in terms of, even like Colleen said, 50 cents or whatever it is. Something.
$5 a year.
Something that just says,
Get a card.
it's kind of buy-in to what it is. And just as a general rule of thumb, I'm happier with that than absolutely zero cost.
Buy-in by non-residents, is that what you're saying, or all seniors?
I'm happy with it as a general rule for anyone. And it might be, with the caveat that there may be places where it just doesn't seem appropriate, or maybe there's some general rule, like, if you live in Section 8 housing, it's zero. But, somebody else, whatever that very minimal amount is.
That's hard to implement.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to say, this is what it should be. I'm just saying, as a general rule, I think that's a good way to go.
I'm still not clear.
I think I am. I guess what I'm hearing is there does not appear to be, either through body language or comments, I'm not sensing there is a very strong concern on the part of the council about the fact that currently, it was in FY08, we spent about $45,000 a year on senior program without a lot of revenue generation. That seems to be a fairly
I feel
broad
comfortable with that
principle.
for the city residents. I'm less enthusiastic about providing those services for seniors who live outside of the city. I'm willing to go along with this for now, but that might be something we have to revisit as the number of participants grow. I'm just concerned that we're now, we have 13 minutes left and we haven't even begun to talk about goals. I would like to suggest that we use the goals that I put on the table at the beginning of the meeting as a straw man from which we can edit and I think it covers most of the things that Bruce had on his list from the break that we took. I think it covers most of those issues. And if we could read down through these and see if there's any kind of agreement on some of them or all of them, and modify them as necessary to add the important issues that other council members have. I think it might get us out in 12 minutes that we have left, or 13 minutes.
Looking at what I had on the list, which was increasing partnerships, growing the number of programs, full use of the facilities,
those are all in there.
better marketing and management practices, I think.
Those last two are housed, and I think that
I think the management practices is the only one that's not.
Yeah. And I think management practices is an expectation that we have for every department.
And I think in many ways what we heard during the earlier discussion was that they're using many of those, and maybe they benefited a little bit from our thoughts, but it's certainly nothing new.
Right.
I would like to add, the concepts, Terry, that you have written here are consistent with the management objectives that we have stated in
Yeah,
our document. And so we agree.
Okay.
We're already there. I mean, we've got increased participation in programs to maximize the use of facilities, increased partnerships. We're with you. We're
Right.
already there.
This wasn't meant to be revolutionary. It was basically to.
I think that's a positive, is what Deborah's saying.
Right.
Yeah, and the idea though is that that with these, then you could come back and develop your plan in response to this of how you're going to do these things, how you plan to do these for the remainder of this year, and we could agree to how we're going to know that you actually did it. So when I walk into the building and I see it's closed on Saturday night, I understand from how you said you're going to maximize the use of the facility, the recreation facilities within Tacoma Park. I'll say, well, yeah, but that's still consistent with how Deborah said she was going to do it. And then I can feel more comfortable that we've agreed to how you're going to accomplish these goals, and that there are some measurements there that we agree to, and not tonight, but in the next when we get back from August, that there would be measurements in there of whatever we establish, and we agree to them, and then at the end of the year we can say, oh, look, you did it, or you were close on this one, and you made this one, and you didn't make another one.
Well, in terms of Saturdays, for example, you're talking about a big budgetary impact that we did not, I mean, in Carla's goals, we have indicated the number of Saturday programs that she's going to offer. We may make it, we may get close. Beyond, expanding the hours to Saturday operations, that's not something I've heard from the council. And if that is in fact something that the council wants to see, then there is a definite cost impact on that, which would...
In terms of...
Staffing, opening the building.
The desk, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And whatever the program fee is,
I think you might have missed the point a little bit there, Terry. I don't think he was suggesting that we should open the building on Saturday. I think what he was saying was that you guys should come back to us. If these are the goals, you should come back to us with a plan, including what the measurements are about whether those goals are achieved, how we measure success, basically. And I think he was just saying, as an example, then that he won't have to micromanage and say, hey, the building wasn't open on Saturday. He can say, well, Deborah said this was what her plan was, and we agreed to it, and here are the goals, and then the council's not in the weeds, and we have an objective measure to say.
And it sounds to me like maybe what you were talking with Stacy Baker about might come up with a couple of those measures that would. Yeah. It may just be pulling together some of what you've got and tweaking it a little bit in a concise version, and we see it and we're comfortable with it.
May I make one comment before we just move on? And I think this is a much broader discussion for, not tonight for sure. I think one of the things, and Mayor Doug and I had a chance to talk about this yesterday, and I think it's a much broader discussion. In my experience, and the staff can tell me if they disagree, there is a difference between a community center and a recreation center, and those are different animals in terms of how they operate. And I think one of the discussions I've had not only with Deborah and some of the rec staff, but truthfully with the entire management team, is about this building, because many of you have talked about that. And I guess what I would like to do is certainly the rec staff can sort of talk about its own use of the building within its span of control, but this building isn't just about the recreation department. And I think the word community in the title of this building, I think, is an important one. And I know one of the things that I mentioned to Doug and to Bruce yesterday, and I think it's, once again, it's a different night, but I do think it would be interesting as you all talk about your council committees and what their role is perhaps to actually charge some of your committees with actually, coming up with programs that are within their particular scope that might be popular, where the staff's role, and not just rec, but the staff's role generally, is to have the building open and staffed and to provide audiovisual. But I think you all talk a lot about partnerships and volunteers, but sometimes when we start talking about this building, I do have concerns that the focus becomes very narrow, that it's rec's job to make sure it's brimming to the gills, and I don't think that's just the rec department's role.
And my reaction with the discussion here was, with what you were saying about Saturdays, I heard the concern about staffing it and, access and opening rooms and security and that kind of thing. And then you went to, and programming, and I thought, no, not programming, not necessarily. That getting to partnerships is all about, we have the facility and these groups can come in, so that you're not having to do all of that programming.
But I think
and I hear that all the time, and I wonder whether when we talk partnerships, whether you hear the same thing that we think we're saying. Because I heard it right there in that discussion.
Yeah, but I think we named this the community center, and we had a recreation center on New Hampshire Avenue. But I think when we were talking about building this building and the need for this building, we were talking about the young people and needing places to go and things to do, and having a facility where we could do programming. So I think there was a vision that this would be a center that was programmed with activities for the youth of the area. And I think that, we're back down in the weeds again to some degree, but I think a lot of the frustration that community members express is, coming in and seeing that we have, 3 staff members here with very few people in the game room or the teen room, and no activities going on in the building, no programs going on in the building. And that's where I hear pushback from the community. And maybe the solution to that is, that the game room and the team room aren't where they haven't been as effective as what we originally thought of, and maybe those staff members could be more effectively used doing programs for the young people. And I'm not proposing that, I'm just saying maybe we need to rethink these things through all the way. But I think if we have goals like this, staff can come back with their imaginative solutions on how we accomplish these goals. Many of the things, like you said, many of the things are targeting these same goals, even though they're not well put right now. And then we can say, yes, that sounds like a good idea, or doesn't, we're not feeling good about that on the how you're going to do it. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me to hear from you in a way that addresses these concerns. So you have to pick up our concerns like Terry's concerns and then report to us and say, you're not seeing things on Saturday night because either we can't afford it, or it's not in our budget, or it's your responsibility to get your constituents down here.
Or it's people are busy and there's not a demand.
Or there's no demand,
I mean,
or
it's a possibility.
whatever it is. But I think it would serve us to hear.
Okay.
That's all.
And I think the response to these goals, if we say, these are the goals, maximize the use of this facility, and you come up with a plan, and we look at it and say, good grief, Deborah, you didn't do anything on Saturday, you don't have anything here for Saturday night, and you can say, well, no, it's going to cost me X, so I have to give up Y, and then we can have that discussion, rather than, us coming in with a laundry list of, here's my issue of the week. We can agree to these things up front one time with the document, and then we all stick with that plan for the year. It's trying to be fair to both of us, right? That we tell you what we expect, and then you tell us how you're going to do it, and we agree, and then then I don't walk in the door and say, Deborah, why aren't you doing this? It's like, well, it's not on what I said I was going to do and what you said you wanted.
I'm still a little confused. You're saying you want more Saturday program. I don't know if I'm hearing that from everybody, but let's take that for an example. We have a metric in there for more Saturday programs within what we have figured our budget to be. Are you saying that is everyone agreeing that they want to see more programs on Saturday? And that's something you want us to take and come back with you and say, this is what we propose for more Saturday programs. And
Except that that's not one of the goals in here. The goal is maximize use of the recreation facilities located within Tacoma Park city limits.
We have this,
and then you come back and tell me how you're going to do that for this coming year, and tell us how you're going to do that. And then if we agree with what you say, then there's no reason for us to be complaining as long as you're adhering to that plan that you have.
May I make a suggestion? Because I know there's a lot of sensitivity to the lateness of the hour, and as one who has probably talked not only to Deborah but to lots of the staff about the use of this building, with your concurrence and with the rest of the council's agreement, my suggestion would be after we come back from recess is if we could have a work session actually talking about how this building does function, how it functions at different times of the day, sort of how the rooms are being used. Obviously, the staff has the advantage that most of us are here anywhere from 8:30, quite often to 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, and certainly the rec staff is, many of them are here at night. So I think it would be good just to have a general discussion with the council in terms of how city facilities are being used, and then maybe from that standpoint, we can talk a little bit about what's working and what's not working. I guess Dan's comment about data, I just think that would be helpful. I'm not trying to drive it in any particular way, but I think we're going to start going around in circles here, and I do understand what Deborah and her staff are looking for direction on, but I'm not sure that we have the foundation available tonight to really go to where I think we may need to go.
And let me just add that I think what you can take about where we're coming from is we don't pretend to know that the solution to increased use of the building is stuff on Saturdays. It's just if you're trying to increase it by some amount, kind of where's the low-hanging fruit, what are the difficulties, so that we understand. You've come up with the best way you think for increasing use of the building. So is that capture where we are? Because
we focused on one little issue of Saturday night use, but there's a whole lot of other things that maybe are issues. And I'd say rather than being issue driven, we should start out with goals. You tell us how you're going to do it, and then we can say, well, what about this or that? It's in front of us, and rather than saying you're not doing this now, we're working towards the future of what are you going to do and how are you going to do it, and then we can agree ahead of time that we agree with it or we don't agree with it. And it's not just Saturday night, it's everything. And if we have agreement with the plan that you come up with, then those little things that have been issues go away. We don't have the foundation to complain about them anymore.
Because we don't want to be down in the weeds with those little issues.
Right.
We want to be sticking with policy, but somehow we've gotten less on policy and more into the weeds in this particular area, and I want to get us back out of that.
And I would just say that I think actually, as you were indicating, many of the things you're doing fit under these priorities. So when you come back to us, it would be, under Goal 1, these 6 things are happening. We expect to do a little more of this, a little less of that. Goal 2, we're doing these 5 things, a little more of this, and that kind of thing, along with how we will decide, measure, weigh whether you've accomplished it or not. So it's kind of 2 pieces. You rearrange what you're already doing or what you plan to do under these goals, and then also you give us the piece about how we'll know whether we accomplished what you said you were going to accomplish. And I think that's what the council's been talking about.
And I want to ask the city manager whether she's thinking, oh my God, that's their job to me, not this group.
Well, it might be you that does it. Somebody does it. That's my point.
I mean, I'll sit down with staff. I don't want to be repetitive. I think there's a need to really talk about how this building is used, and there are certainly downtimes. I think the staff knows what those are. They may have some insight into why that is. I think they're obviously already having discussions as a staff in terms of, programs and what time they take place and in what location they take place. But I think it is, in my mind, not just a discussion about rec. And I don't mean to be repetitive about that, but I repeat a comment I made when the council was talking about the $1.2 million that is going to be spent renovating this space. And, that was community-driven. Rec was very supportive of that. But I think we do need to talk about who's doing what and who's, I don't even want to say responsibility because that makes it sound like a burden. But I think as we talk about how this building is used, there's a community component of that. I was just talking to Suzanne earlier today about, the library does a lot of community programs. Sometimes they do some here, sometimes they do them in the library. Is there an opportunity, to have some of their programs spread out in the building? I think it's a very appropriate avenue of discussion for you all to have with arts and humanities and all your committees. So I do understand what the council's saying in the piece that's applicable to rec. I guess what I'm saying is that is a broader discussion that in my mind does need to take place. And I do understand where you're coming from tonight, and Deborah and I can sit down and talk tomorrow.
I think it's that I agree with you that there's clearly a disconnect between at least some of us and our vision of what this building's use should be. And, and you hear it come out of me when I say that I thought we had talked about using the bus to bring kids here for the programs that are here. Well, if you're not talking about doing programs here, then of course you're not going to bus them here.
Exactly. And I think one of the comments that, for those who were on the Greenbelt tour, one of the things what's interesting, at least to me, and it was not the only time I'd been in that building, because I've been over there before for city manager type meetings, but when you saw really where the concentration of people were on that day, where were they? They were the weight rooms and the pool, neither of which are connected to our facility. When you actually got into what is their community center proper, which is certainly a much more expansive facility, truthfully, you didn't see that many people on a Saturday afternoon around, 11 o'clock. I'm not a rec person, so I don't know what the patterns tend to be in seeing buildings. I can just say, speaking about my own family, I barely see my husband during the week, so, there's a lot of families that I think value their weekend time, and that's a discussion that I would look to have at some future date about what do people want to do and where, and is there, working with Kay was still here, the rec committee, who certainly besides the council and the staff goes out in the community, what would bring people in this building, and what is that type of programming, I think getting to Terry's point, so that resources are being spent in a way that benefits the community. So I do think there's a lot more discussion that needs to take place in the community to find out what would be attractive to people here. Is that concerts? Is it family programming? I guess I just don't want to see the rec staff go on some frenetic thing just to start trying to program the building with without it having some purpose. And I know the council doesn't want that either.
But I would think
so.
they're doing that now with all these programs. And
Yeah, I think
that was one of the things that struck me with looking at the brochures, the handouts, what do you call it?
Right.
Call it a program, but it's a book.
And I certainly,
but I noticed there are a lot of those things in there that ended up not actually happening. So
Right, and I don't view that, in my experience, Terry, I don't view that as a failure. I've seen that happen many of you have rec programming experience, and I think part of that's trying things and trying to figure out what that community need is. So I know, Mayor, you're looking at the clock. And
I just want to reiterate that the list of goals here, the community center really just appears very briefly, and there are many other things listed on here, and we keep coming back to the community center, which I think is unfortunate because it distracts us from the broader stuff which is here, and I hope that when we come back to it, that we will focus on these broader issues rather than just the community center. I think that's just an example.
Great point.
An unfortunate example.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think it is just an example. And I would just say, to be clear, I don't think we're saying that rec should be responsible for 100% of the program in the community center. And it again goes back to come back with a plan and a way to measure. And maybe that measurement is some percentage of hours or programming that's run in here. And you say, based on what the community need is and the facilities that exist in this building, this is what we think a good goal is. And at the end of the year, we will have met that goal or we won't, and then we can have a discussion about what we need to do to change things to, to meet the goal if we have.
And my point would be, that's only one of the items listed here, and I would like to see something about the swimming pool, the recreation center, the gymnasiums, the fields, the parks, even the schools. This is not an exhaustive list.
So is that agreement that this is a list of goals and that staff should come back with the plan and metrics?
The goals are in the budget, I think is the point that Deborah made. Did I miss that? That was the point, right? They exist in the budget.
Well, not the, yes, they do. I think the target of percentages is not anywhere.
Doesn't have any basis on anything.
No, and I personally am uncomfortable with attaching numbers. Feels a little bit like a quota to me.
Me too.
Well, I would suggest you come back with a plan. If you don't like these numbers, put in the numbers you like. These are our general guidelines.
I'm actually going to agree with Deborah.
Thank you.
I'm disagreeing with you.
I think this is hard. What might maybe be more useful to do like a baseline measure, kind of take a snapshot and see how much we reflect your community. Yeah. How can you do that? Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, I guess the comment I would make about that is that we should try to ensure through our pricing and our marketing, and I think we certainly strive to do that, but always keep that in mind of trying to appeal to the broader community. But my husband and I were having some discussions about this, and obviously the council is aware I'm in an interracial marriage, and my husband, I think, put it very simply, is as a city, you can provide opportunities for people to gather, but you can't force people to join programs, you can't force people in terms of who they choose to be with, and that's where my concern would come through with numbers. I think it's a very admirable goal as a community to be through all our programming, whether that's whatever that may be, to try to bring people together. But I think as long as there's a recognition that we can't force that, and that's not failure if it doesn't happen necessarily.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to, sailing is a sport that attracts a lot of white people. And I lived in a community that was 50% African American and 25% Latinos and Asians, and it was incredibly difficult to put together a sailing team. And what we ended up with in the end was actually served people in the different niches. And the way that we did it was through the schools and bringing the school classrooms in. And the school classrooms were very homogenized. And so you can say, look, we'd like you to do outreach and make the programs look more like the community, but you can't number it, or it just doesn't work that way.
Just for the viewing audience, I'd like to point out that this doesn't say that every program should be integrated or racially integrated or anything like that. It gives overall goals for across the board for all programs, and then for any individual programs, that we would at least have some that are mixed diversity programs.
I think if we, this is probably information we already collect, and if we don't, we should. If we're collecting address and ward in the people who register for and participate in things, that would actually give you a pretty good sense of the diversity. And are we providing programs for everybody in the city, which is what we're more concerned about. So being able to look at a ward breakdown, or even look at dots on a map of where participants come from would be a very powerful measurement tool. And I think get away from having us have any of these feelings of quotas or numbers like that.
Well, and I think we do provide programs for the whole community, whether we attract people from the whole community, I think is the point we're trying to get at. What can we do to diversify the neighborhoods? I really think that's an easier metric for us to get at and to target. You know, if we know that we have a heavy participation in one ward and not the others, that one's a little bit more doable.
One of the things, we actually had this challenge when I was in Prince George's County. And one of the things that we did was begin to, we attacked it by via marketing and going out a little more into the community and targeting certain groups, religious groups, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, things of that nature. And we also advertised our programs on the web as well as in print in English as well as Spanish. So that was one of the couple of the things that we did in order to attract various audiences and things like that. So it was also, we also had a language bank, so other cultures wanted to participate. We actually had translators in order to translate our information into different various languages and things like that. So we did it through marketing versus attaching like percentages.
I think with if there are neighborhoods such as Pinecrest that doesn't have the level of participation in the programs at either the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center or the programs here, or any of the other places, that what I'm expecting in addressing that, if we said that we want basically a pretty even representation of participants from the different wards, that you would look at that and say, well, we're not getting a strong participation from that area of the city, then you would use maybe the bus to get people to, make it easier for them to participate in the programs.
Or bring programs to that area.
Or bring programs to that area to do it. That it would be you would recognize that was the goal, and so you would come up with the creative ideas on how to make it happen.
Or see if there was a reason to talk to the neighborhood association about, could you make a presentation? Could you come tell them what you're doing, see what they need, what they'd like, coordinate with the council member, and make that happen?
That's one suggestion that we've talked about with the Recreation Committee, since they represent a lot of different neighborhood associations, that they could really help by getting out to the community associations and finding those things out. So I think that's on our list. Right, Kay?
Oh, sure.
You're okay with it, you told me that.
So what I've heard is that people would
agree with this in general if we just limited it to a diversity of ward of residents?
I'm happy to just say, recognizing that trying to address the diversity of the city, however you measure it, doesn't have to be, a particular thing, ward or anything else, and I think it sounds like you're already doing a lot of that.
Well,
But
certainly
how do you measure? I mean, that's the thing, is like, I thought we were having an interesting discussion there, because yes, we want diversity across the city, so what's the measure for whether we're actually achieving diversity beyond anecdotally saying, yeah, I think we are. I see lots of different people in lots of different programs. And I think we need to have some quantitative measure, and I'm...
What about the survey that they gave us the copies of? Doesn't that tell us by ward who participated and what their age group is?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple comments, and I think staff can correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, one I think is, I think with the new software will probably certainly enable a lot, and Stacy's fine help, will certainly enable us, I think, to do a lot more of the data crunching. I think that was something that we had committed to. I guess just as a general principle, and Suzanne and I have on our to-do list in the very near future, or at least to offer the council some thoughts since you're doing your August homework on priorities. I think in terms of what Suzanne and I have talked about as metrics just across the board in terms of council priorities, we would really encourage you all to really keep in mind the survey data. My hope as your city manager is this was not a one-shot deal. It's always been at least my vision that we would redo this survey, hopefully every 2 to 3 years. And as you look at everything, including a lot of the quality of life indicators, some of the the ward differentiations that we've seen, Suzanne and I have been talking to the management team and trying to come up with some things just as food for thought for the council as you start working through that process, in August and come back in September. We're really looking at suggesting to you all some metrics in terms of very specific issues that were raised in the survey. Now, that won't be something, until you do another survey that you know how we're doing, but the chief and I have talked about what those, what we would hope to get to in percentages, and I think we could do the same thing in recreation. It is a very quantifiable way of getting broad-based community feedback, and probably at least at this point the only way that we have to do that where it is somewhat scientifically based and not just anecdotal and people's perceptions. So that's what I would hope we would do just across the board in all service areas.
Yeah, I think the survey is great, but then just connecting sort of this is the goal, this is the measure, and here's where we find it.
Right.
So that, and I would agree that we should do the survey, whatever it is, every 2 years. But then it's just, when we look at it, we can come back and say, okay, this is what we're looking at, and we don't have to do all the remembering and search the survey and say, is this the...
We're on the same page, I think, because I think what we were going to do is say, here's the measurement, here's where we've been, here's where we'd like to go, and here's the steps that we plan to take as a staff, with the council's concurrence, to try to get there. So I think we have a decent sense of...
That sounds like a good method of getting where we're trying to go.
Yeah.
And we've been in OT for 34 minutes in the interest of, opportunity cost. We're burning money we could be spending on scholarships.
And Dan needs to go home and pack for his vacation, too.
I'm trying to get out of here. All right. Well, we got one other thing we got to do, which is the senior manager position. We said we wanted.
What was the final decision on the goals? Is that?
I think I'm sensing that there seems to be, in various forms and to some degrees, but based on the conversation that you all have had, at least some general consensus, at least in concept with some of these. There may be differences in terms of how things are worded. Am I misreading the council? Colleen's looking at me very skeptically right now.
I heard that largely the goals in the top of the sheet are already, Deborah says they're already incorporated into the goals for the rec department. The material in the bottom of the sheet with discrete numbers and gender mix and racial mix and cultural and economic are kind of off the table because we're more interested in ward participation. Did I read that right?
I think it's not that we're more interested in ward participation, it's that it's too difficult to, yeah. And to some extent, as people cluster in, this is a really diverse community, actually, street level by street level, as communities across the country go. But there's still, you know, we have 3 wards that we constantly talk about where we need to get more folks out, more representation. So it's a surrogate, I think, for the other issues that we're trying to get at.
So I would just say we strike the other 4 and leave it at the diversity of ward residents.
Accurate.
I was happy striking you're looking at bullet points 3 and 4 and leaving 1, 2, 5, and 6. And put the surrogate in for 3 and 4.
That's kind of what I heard, too. That takes the collaboration and partnership. The community events is important. Maximizes the use of all facilities, offers a range. And then in the 3 and the 4 is the ones that achieve a mix and achieve a mix.
Okay, so
we're replacing.
We collapse those into just achieve a mix of ward residents.
I would say that we strive to achieve just something to the effect, and I can work on it with the staff. I'm seeing sort of general nods and kind of trying to count noses on the staff side of things. I think we hear what you're saying, and I guess if the council is okay with it, I'd like the latitude to kind of talk to the staff tomorrow, you know, and just come back with a goal that I think captures what I'm hearing from most of you all.
Does that work for you, Terry?
I'm not trying to drive it. I'm just trying to see if I can.
I'm just saying that I think number 3 is it. If you just cross out everything except ward residents, that you have the diversity, overall diversity across, you're attempting to achieve an overall diversity across all programs of a mix of residents from all 6 wards, and that in 20% of the programs you want to have that same kind of a mix. And maybe the 20%, maybe you feel that that's too high, maybe we do 5%. I mean, let's just agree to a number and see what we can do this year.
And let's see what staff mulls over and comes back to us with. I think they got the
I think we got the gist. That's okay.
I just would like to add one in terms of a goal versus a metric, and that is, I think that across the city, and I've heard the council talk about participation in your own wards in various civic responsibilities, boards, committees, that you also are experiencing a similar imbalance in participation, and that this is really a citywide issue. I want it to be a goal, and I'm in agreement with that, but I wouldn't want it to be a measure of success or not success.
And I guess I would agree with Deborah. I think the council may recall about a month ago when I had the opportunity privately to talk to the council, you know, just sort of some of our feedback sessions and exchanging information. And I guess to kind of put what Deborah said, I think, in a different way. But I think what the survey results said to me is that we have an engagement problem, generally in certain segments of the city in terms of their connectedness to the city, you know, how they feel they're served. And it's probably a twist on what Deborah said, but I would hope that's not only, you know, an outreach goal for recreation, but I think it should be a broad-based goal of the city in general. And I think that includes the council in terms of representation on boards and commissions. I think Deborah is right. I think it is certainly something that we should be striving towards in rec, but I think it's also an issue we see elsewhere in the city.
I agree with you. I think it's a goal, and I think it's achievable, and I think it's measurable, and I think we should have it, and people should be graded on it.
And that's not to say in year 1
Correct.
that participation or participation in recreation programs is going to be equal across all wards. You may acknowledge in year 1 that there's going to be disparities in wards, and we have some targets in the first year, but the idea is eventually to get where we'd like it to be, we push the target up a little bit every year, and we do some things differently, and we eventually achieve what we ideally would like.
Right, and I think one of the things I guess I'd like the opportunity to talk to the staff about, and I think this council, and I have appreciated this as your manager, has been very sensitive to, is what are we asking staff to do and what are the resources that are required to get there? And that's something that I'm not going to get from the staff tonight, but I know Gregory had mentioned something that intrigued me about some things he did in Prince George's County and language banks and all, you know, banks and translation services. All those things have a cost, so I think the council from my perspective, seems very open to us having an internal discussion about what may be necessary to get here, and then truthfully, it's my job to bring it back to you, and truthfully, your job to fund it, if that's really what you want to do. And I'm seeing a lot of, I think the council's always been supportive of that. We just need a little bit more opportunity than we have here tonight to talk about how that might work.
I think we need real choices about, what that means. So you may come back and say, it costs $500,000, we think, on our best estimate, it's going to cost $500,000 more a year for you to get meaningful engagement from young people in wards 4, 5, and 6. And we have to know, well, does that mean that we need to come up with $500,000 more of the budget, or does it mean that there's something else that we're not going to do, and what does that really mean? And I want to see what the whole range of opportunities are. And they may not even be in rec, but there might be some things that we don't do anymore.
And I would like to add to that, and that is that we, I think we all agree that more outreach, more efforts are certainly doable. The You Can Lead a Horse to Water comes to mind. We can offer the best programs, the best price programs. We cannot make people participate. Our goal is to have as many different people participate. We think, certain programs, as you've indicated, that failed, we thought they were great ideas. Everything, maybe we should have marketed it differently. We just do what we hear from the public, what we know professionally, what trends are. This is what we look at. But we cannot make people sign up. I just want to say that we have to be careful about measuring who actually. There are many variables. It may be transportation. It may not be. It may be
that they're in programs at Rolling Terrace after school, or they're closer to Long Branch, so they go there even though they're Tacoma Park residents.
Right.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of factors to it.
Well, I think one of the things that I know Suzanne and I talked about that struck me and may have struck some other council members when I looked at the survey results is there were very comparable percentages of residents who said they used rec services and who said they used the Tacoma Park Library. Those percentages were pretty much dead even. And I think that's a recognition that unlike, residents don't have a choice of who's fixing the street. They don't have a choice of who's going to provide police service. When it comes to the use of the library, which, truthfully, council hasn't talked about it, but there's an equal amount of city subsidy for that service. People have choices. Reuben and I had a discussion a couple weeks ago, where he talked about a lot of folks in his ward won't use the Tacoma Park Library because Long Branch offers a very good facility. Long Branch has very good senior programs, and I think the fact that Paul is attracting the numbers she has, it speaks to the work she's doing. But residents do have choices in those two departments that, and they also have, I think particularly with rec, there's also private parties that provide services, and so it's a different mix. I think we do hear what you're saying, and certainly we'll put together some thoughts in terms of how we can get there.
Okay, I think we've reached consensus on that. We've got to do that one more thing so we can get out of here, which is the senior manager position. So.
And what is it that we have to do?
We have to say, yes, you can go ahead and advertise the position, or no, you can't. And we said we wanted to have this discussion before we were going to do that, and we promised to do it by our break. So.
I would say based on the discussion we've had here and what we've agreed to and staff's come back with, I would make the motion that we vote to fund the senior management position, that they go forward, that they can hire the senior management position.
I'll second it. Young guys.
Any discussion?
I said at the beginning to the mayor that if we agreed to goals, that would be enough for me to say, yes, let's release the position. Since that commitment to the goals is a little bit weaker, my support is a little bit weaker. So I'm on the fence.
I'm fine with it. I'm fine with the suggestion.
And I am too.
Motion.
We got the votes. So.
Yeah. Colleen has something to say, but she might sway my opinion.
She's had a quizzical look on her face.
Oh, I just was going to stay quiet so that we could all go home.
So you can do that.
I just wanted to give you the opportunity.
I think that the administration of the department is, I think that there's a lot of administrative staff in the department for the level of services that are provided, and I am not convinced that they need the additional position.
You can advertise the position.
Pardon me?
You can advertise the position.
Thank you.
Can I make one last point? And that is on the goals, there's this question about, well, it may not be able to achieve it. We lay out the goals, and then you come back with the steps on how you're going to achieve it, and maybe those aren't one-year steps. Right? So that's something to keep in mind.
Okay, appreciate that.
Thank you all for coming, staying, participating.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank the council for all the time you took, obviously. And I know that there was a real effort by the council to try to get this discussion accomplished before the break. There's been a lot of, I can't remember what Doug Berry's comment was. I think it was freewheeling anxiety was the term he used with me.
What is that?
I think he had to go home with his daughter. But anyway, I just appreciate the time the council has taken, and we just appreciate the feedback.
Thank you. And I want to know how I can get on your side of the table so I can